Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's College Football with Sam coming to you on a Thursday late afternoon. It's already dark out here in the state of Michigan where I am from, but there's a lot of evergreen content that I have for you guys. Plenty of special topics on top of some final previews, some final analysis of Saturday's games. All will be delivered as promised, and also want to give a little bit of an update about my schedule. So next week, I know that we've been changing our live show schedule a lot, but we go live often enough to where you guys can catch us. We're going to try to go Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. Give a little bit of that Tuesday period a rest so that you guys can consume the content and not be overwhelmed with it, and also so that I don't have to be overwhelmed with planning 4 shows in a row. Just a little bit of an update on all of those things. But without further ado, I think that it is appropriate to get into the meat and potatoes immediately. I do have somewhere to be. So I want to mostly talk about the college football playoff to begin this show off, and then get into some of the other topics that we have. Thank you to Kevin Chavis, our Cheeks Manning, some other people for coming in the chat pretty early. Really appreciate you guys for coming on here, and make sure if you haven't already to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts and analysis down below. Be active in the live chat. I do have somewhere to be, so the segments won't have many intermissions or breaks, but if you do have a super chat, something you want to say to me, just send in one, and when I can get to it in between the segments, I will. But let's talk about the college football playoff rankings and a few teams that I think are overrated and also underrated teams. It's really an interesting topic because who's overrated and who's underrated is subjective. It's really subjective depending on what you use, what you assess, the different models and things like that. The College Football Playoff Committee, I think this year has done probably an all right job ranking teams, but strength of schedule, taking that into account and taking power ratings into account and strength of record is still a big problem. Overrating and underrating teams is still a massive problem in college football. The College Football Playoff Committee and rankings are never going to really be perfect, but I believe there are a select few teams that the committee and the public at large are dramatically overrating and underrating to varying degrees. So the College Football Playoff Committee's most recent rankings are up on the screen in front of you. You got Ohio State at 1, Indiana at 2, A&M at 3. The top 5 remains unchanged. Alabama 4th, Georgia 5th. The 6 through 10 spot changed a little bit. Texas Tech leapfrogged Ole Miss to be at 6th. Ole Miss is at 7th. Oregon's at 8th. Notre Dame is at 9th. Texas is at 10th. Most of these schools raised a spot because BYU dropped to 5th, and the final school in front of them is Oklahoma at 11th. We have Utah at 13th, Vanderbilt at 14th. Miami jumped 3 spots to 15th. We got Georgia Tech at 16th, USC at 17th, Michigan at 18th. Virginia dropped 5 spots to 19th. Louisville dropped 5 spots to 20th. Iowa only dropped 1 spot to 21st. Thought that was one of the more ingenious things the committee did in their rankings. I do think Iowa's one of the best 3-loss teams, if not the best in college football. Pittsburgh at 22nd, Tennessee at 23rd. USF jumped inside the top 25 to be 24th, and Cincinnati is not ranked. Here is how these rankings play out in a hypothetical bracket. So Alabama, Ohio State, A&M, and Indiana, they receive the first round bye. And then Georgia, Oregon, Texas Tech, and Ole Miss receive home games. Texas, Miami, Notre Dame, and USF, those are away teams that get into the playoffs. Miami is the highest ranked ACC team. Highly unlikely they'll win the ACC championship game. That there is a shot for them to do so. They could make it as an at-large, though, since they are placed 15th in the rankings, especially if the highest ranked ACC team or ACC champion, so the ACC champion, not highest ranked ACC champion, but if the ACC champion gets left into the playoffs entirely and Miami is just ranked high enough to not be the first team left out. We'll see how that goes. Oklahoma, BYU, Utah, and Vanderbilt are the first 4 out in this scenario, and USF is the G5 champion, the highest ranked G5 champion. So therefore, they get an invitation here. More likely than not, as the 12 seed can't see the G5, highest ranked G5 champion getting much higher than the 12 seed. But who knows? That is the current bracket as things stand. And this right here is what I think is one of the more overrated teams in America. Let's get back to looking at that bracket for a second, just a quick second. This is the Week 12 college football playoff bracket as it stands from the committee. Now I want to move on to the most overrated and most underrated teams, in my opinion. So let's start off by looking at the overrated teams and then move on to the underrated teams, saving the best for last. One of the more overrated teams in college football right now is the Ole Miss Rebels. So Ole Miss is 8th in S&P Plus, but they're 12th in FPI and FEI. Their only big win is over number 11 Oklahoma on the road. Now, they did play Georgia competitively on the road, and I do think Georgia's a really good team. But only beating Oklahoma, and then your other signature wins are LSU, South Carolina. They're probably going to get a win over Florida this Saturday, but how much does that mean? It kind of seems like Florida has quit. What signature victory does Ole Miss have, and how much of their power rating is made up by blowing out some inferior competition and priors where ever since Kiffin's second year, Ole Miss has on average been a top 25 team? I do not know how good Ole Miss is. I think they are good, but great? Top 10 good? I don't think so. The metrics don't really back that up. In fact, if you look at ESPN's efficiency metrics, which is just looking at a team from a per-play perspective only for this year, so no priors, no recruiting rankings, Ole Miss isn't even top 15. They're just hovering around that 15th spot in between 20th and 15th. In FEI and FPI, we've already talked about, just power ratings-wise, they're not top 10. They're just outside at 12th. Another team that is overvalued is BYU. They are 5 or more spots lower in all power ratings. So in FPI, they're 17th. In S&P Plus, I believe they're around there, maybe 18th, a little bit lower. Similar in FEI. In top 25 games, at home, they beat rival Utah 24-21 in a game where they basically won the turnover battle. Utah had more failed fourth down attempts than the Cougars did, and at one point led. So very back and forth, very competitive game. They're ranked right around where Utah is. So at best, based on that big game and their metrics, they're properly rated. You then look at Texas Tech, and Texas Tech won that game 29-7. But if Morton were healthy or their offensive line could pass protect, Texas Tech, more likely than not, makes things worse in that game than BYU makes things better if you simulate that game 1,000 times. So I believe that BYU's ranked too high at 12th. They, for me, to view them as a college football playoff team. We're not purely doing power ratings here. We're only factoring in power ratings when it doesn't match up with what the on-field product is. So we're weighing them out. Vegas should not determine who the playoff teams are. They should not. But we also shouldn't completely factor out metrics and go with feel-good stories. And that's what BYU is. BYU is a feel-good story. If they win out and then get blown out by Texas Tech again in the Big 12 title game, I do not want to see them in the 12-team playoff. They would not be deserving of an appearance there. We have Virginia at 19th. in the rankings. Virginia is overrated because they're not even a top 40 team in power ratings. They win a ridiculous amount of one-score games. They play inspired. Their coaching has improved. This is Virginia's best team in a minute. It's their best under Tony Elliott. But when you lose to NC State and when you lose to Wake Forest, I am not going to take you seriously. I had a back and forth with Garrison from the Voice of College Football Ohio State channel. Garrison's a friend of the channel. And him and I were talking on Twitter about, would I pick Michigan to beat Virginia? And I said, easily. And he thought that was funny and a little bit out of pocket, a little bit overzealous by me. And from my perspective, Michigan's not great, but Virginia is winning a bunch of one-score games in the worst Power 4 conference. I think Michigan would probably, along with 20 other teams, handle this team at the lines of scrimmage and handle them in a very mean and nasty way. They are the one-score game winner kings, and they're not doing it in the fashion that Iowa does. I do not think it's sustainable. Maybe I'm wrong, but when you're 10 games in, like 9-10 games in as Virginia is, and you're still not power rated top 40, that means you are not a good team. They are a lucky team. They should not even be considered to get in the college football playoff unless they went out and win the ACC, at which point I think with 11 wins, they would probably at least flirt with deserving a playoff appearance. And then last overrated team before we move on to the underrateds. This is the one I have the least amount of gripes about because Tennessee is top 25 in power ratings. But I do think the way Heupel plays ball inflates how good this team looks in metrics by scoring 70 points on the weaker teams. The FCS teams, the G5 teams. As we've seen Tennessee progress through SEC play, Joey Aguilar has regressed. The team just doesn't look as impressive as it did last year, as it did earlier in the year when they played Georgia competitively. Their best wins are close losses to Georgia and Oklahoma and a performance against Alabama that was worse than the scoreboard indicated. Those are who I think the most overrated teams are at the moment. An honorable mention I would say is, how do I put this? Last week it would have been Washington, but Washington lost to Wisconsin. Another honorable mention I would say is at this point either Notre Dame or Miami. Honorable mention. Power ratings wise, they're accurately rated, if not underrated, but I'm not all that impressed with their resumes. So that's just something that I wanted to bring up there. Speaking of teams that I think have impressive resumes, though, that aren't as widely recognized as they should be, I give you Oregon as an underrated team. Their resume is not super strong from a merit-based angle, but from an analytical angle, they're almost unanimously top 3. Kelly Ford does a good job with his ratings on Twitter. They're third there. They're third in S&P+, third in FEI, third in FPI. They're very close to Indiana and Ohio State, and they would be at the top of the SEC outside of maybe Alabama. Metrically, they wouldn't be, but I think you got to adjust for Alabama playing the gauntlet they have, which doesn't help their power ratings case. You do have to adjust for that. Power ratings get easily seduced by blowing out weaker competition. But Oregon, I think, is a underrated team that's being a little bit hated because, let's face it, the way that they play and the way Lanning acts rubs people the wrong way. They're not a media darling because they're not cute, and they're willing to win games in an ugly fashion. They talk a big game. They outspend everyone. They're out recruiting from a quality angle all the big teams, and the big teams don't like that. Their only loss is to a 10-0 Indiana, who's number 1 in FEI and number 2 in all the other metrics. That's their only loss. I have been on record for saying I don't think any other team goes into Autzen and beats that Oregon team the way Indiana does, and I firmly believe that. So maybe I'm wrong here, but the fact they won at Iowa, banged up with the travel, and beat Iowa at their own game gives me confidence that this team is better than the 8th best team in America, and is decidedly in the top 10, whereas I'm seeing a lot of people on Twitter say they're overrated, and it's show me the evidence. I don't think you can. Texas Tech is underrated. Maybe not by the committee. 6th is probably appropriate, but a lot of people are comparing them to Georgia Tech or to many of the top tier ACC teams, or even comparing them to Utah. That is heresy. Tech has something that very few teams in even the SEC and Big Ten have, and that is a NFL, and I mean truly NFL defensive line that translates to a lead on-field product. So what do I mean by that? Well, Oregon and Ohio State probably have plenty of future NFL players in their defensive line, but they do not have the production that Texas Tech does there. Oregon doesn't even have 20 sacks. Ohio State does, but Texas Tech, I think, is more impressive by a mile compared to those two defensive lines and a lot of defensive lines in the SEC. What Indiana is able to get out of their defensive line in terms of sack and pressure production, Tech gets that without having to scheme the same way because they have just ridiculous amounts of NFL talent at edge, and they're deeper at defensive line than I think anyone predicted them to be, especially at defensive tackle where they've sustained injuries and haven't dropped off. They beat number 13 Utah and number 12 BYU by 46 total points. Averaged 23 points per victory. Their one loss is to a healthy Arizona State team on the road, where Tech played their worst game of the year and had a backup QB. Reminds me very much of what Oregon did at Iowa and what Indiana did at Penn State, except Tech didn't win because I think they're a tier below those two teams. But Tech's still really good. They're a great team. And to underestimate them, I think, is very faulty and not an appropriate thing to do. We're going to talk about it in a future video and segment, they might be able to win a title if Morton is healthy. Defensive line production and elite defensive line production is basically a prerequisite to win it all. Ohio State, Michigan, the last two Georgia teams have had that. Clemson teams under Dabo, especially the 18 team, had that. And even 20 Alabama, 19 LSU, like 17 Alabama especially, but more 19 LSU and 20 Bama, who are more known to be offensive. They still had great lines of scrimmage and great defensive lines. Tech has that. It's a question of what do they have elsewhere, and I think they have enough pieces elsewhere to potentially be in that national title conversation, especially if the bracket pans out well for them, and especially if they get a first-round bye, which looks unlikely, but we'll see. Indiana is underrated. They're underrated because a lot of people are... So this is what's interesting with Indiana. A lot of people are talking about Ohio State as overrated, but they're just saying Ohio State's overrated, and they're not offering any alternative to who's number one. So what they're essentially telling you is either in some cases they want Ohio State to be worse than they are, but can't find any logical team to substitute them with, which is just bad journalism. On another hand, there are legitimate reasons to believe Ohio State is not as dominant as many of their fans believe, but they look really good. So maybe it's just a weaker number one than prior years. Well, with Indiana, they're number one in FEI, they're top two elsewhere. In a lot of power ratings, they're weighed down by the talent gap between those teams, which very well could come into play, but if Indiana enters the playoffs healthy, that may not matter all that much. And they beat Illinois, Penn State, number 21 Iowa, and number 8 Oregon. They beat Oregon by 10. They beat Illinois, who, based on projections, will probably enter the top 25 again, by 53 points. They beat Penn State by 4, or by 3, rather, and they beat Iowa by 5 and really 7 before that safety. 3 of those games were on the road. 2 of them were by 1 score. The one team they play at home, they beat by 53. From a merit-based perspective, they have the best resume in the country, and no one is better coached than them. No one. And I don't have them at number 1 right now, but the argument I would make for them being at number 1 is that they can run the ball in power situations, they can run it in explosive situations, they can pass the football deep, they can pass it intermediate, They can pass to the boundary, over the middle, across the field. They can stop the run. They can get pressure with 4. They can get home with a blitz. They can cover one-on-one with one of their corners in D'Angelo Pons. Their linebackers are deep. They can basically do everything, given the right circumstances. And not even Ohio State can do that. They can't run the football. And no other team in America, I think, on a given day can be as complete as Indiana has shown. Doesn't mean they're the best, because they have some limitations in the talent and depth department that Ohio State and Alabama and other teams even on this list like Oregon don't have. But in terms of a complete team, Indiana has shown shades of greatness, shards of greatness in every category this year in a way that no other team has. So that's the argument for putting them at number 1 if you want to. And the fact that I don't really see anyone even entertaining that conversation outside of maybe Indiana fans tells me they're a bit underrated. On top of the resume angle, if you're truly ranking based on resume, Indiana should be at number 1 right now in any CFP ranking. And last but not least, Michigan. This was tough. There are probably other teams that are better suited up here. Michigan just has the 14th best strength of record. Kelly Ford's most deserving rankings, which talk about who deserves to be in the playoffs. They say Michigan's underrated. And Michigan's losses are to Oklahoma and USC on the road, which, depending on where you look, when those teams are healthy, they're top 10. And they've beaten everyone else, including a Washington team that many, not necessarily myself, but many respected for a while as maybe a top 20 caliber team, and they beat them pretty soundly. So Michigan, from a resume angle and a merit-based angle, should probably be viewed as top 15. Power ratings-wise, it's anywhere from top 20 to barely top 15 there. So that was tough, but especially with the first 3, Oregon, Texas Tech, and Indiana, I do believe them to be underrated. Let me know what you think about my overrated and underrated teams down in the comment section below. Would love to hear your thoughts, your disagreements, and if you have the time, give me some of your underrated and overrated teams and why you think that way. But let's move on to talk about some previews for the week. Let me check the chat before I forget to do so. Nope. Thank you, Asian Posturine, for being a member. Always love to shout out the members who are being active in the chat. You do get priority reply to comments and occasionally early access to video segments, depending on how quickly I can get them uploaded. So thanks to that. But let's talk about Michigan and Northwestern for a minute and get on to some other previews. The Michigan Wolverines travel to Wrigley Field to take on the Northwestern Wildcats this Saturday at noon, 11 a.m. Central Time kickoff for Northwestern. This will be a Fox Big Noon kickoff game, which I think just shows you the state of the current Big Ten TV deal. No bueno. Not good. But this game, with Michigan being favored by 12.5 points, 7-2 record, 5-1 in Big Ten play, Northwestern's 5-4, 3-3, has an opportunity to be an entertaining game. Michigan has not performed well on the road. Michigan is not this invincible team. They are a team in kind of a rebuild year. And Northwestern is this really, I would put it in a way that they're this feisty operation that's just hard to beat. They are a tough out for any team that is not invincible, and Michigan isn't invincible. So let's take a look at Michigan. Why do I view them as a team that's good but not great, and why could they be vulnerable here? Well, look at their road games. So Oklahoma, they lost by 11. Nebraska, they beat by 3. That was probably one of their more impressive wins of the year. USC, they lose by 18 points. Michigan State, they beat by 11, and it was a very slow-paced, ugly game. There are some exceptions to this rule. So Nebraska was an impressive win on the road. Purdue was a pretty bad win at home, 21-16. Michigan is good. They have a chance to win out and beat Northwestern, beat Maryland, to beat Ohio State, go 10-2. If they're 10-2, they're a lock for the playoffs. There is a much higher chance of that happening than a lot of people believe. But also, like, look at the schedule, look at where the losses are, where the wins are. Michigan's schedule also has aligned for them quite nicely. So while I think they're a 7-2 caliber team, they're a top 20 caliber team, maybe top 15, with how college football operates right now and with how Northwestern has played some of their opponents, if you're not top 10 and if you play the way Michigan does, where you do not have the capability of getting up big on teams because of your limited skill position talent, a team like Northwestern is not a safe out for you. Northwestern lost to Oregon. Final score was really 34-14, 34-0. They scored 14 points in garbage time. Lost to Tulane pretty big, but Tulane's one of the better G5 teams. Beaten UCLA, beat Penn State on the road, shut out Purdue, beat UL Monroe at home pretty soundly. Played Nebraska in a close game, and they kept it close with USC at the half, and that was on the road. So they have a little bit of an extra day of rest to prepare against Michigan, though Michigan's also coming off of a bye. So both these teams get a little bit longer time than they're used to prepare for this game. Northwestern staff, I thought, did a pretty good job off the bye in that first half against USC. Just things fell out of control. And this will be at Wrigley Field, neutral site game. It's not as much of a trap game for Michigan because of that. Their practice facility on the Great Lakes is a very hard place to get up for and play inspired ball in. It's windy, it's weird, it's quiet, it's not a normal environment. Wrigley Field should alleviate some of that for Michigan, but Northwestern is a strong team in the trenches. I respect their staff, and they could present some problems for Michigan. I think the biggest problem they could present for the Wolverines is their defensive front is their strength, their secondary is their weakness. Michigan, do they have the receiver and quarterback chemistry? Do they even have the talent at receiver if Underwood plays a good game to really exploit that? I don't know. Odds probably say no, they don't. But I don't exactly know the answer to that. Caleb Komolafe has been incredible in his vision, in his power, in his ability to break tackles. I love Jackson Carcello, Caleb Tiernan, Martez Lewis. It's an offensive line that is appropriately sized for the Big Ten, that's strong, that doesn't give up. They do a good job in really all phases of the game. Northwestern's issue is similar to Michigan's. They only have one, maybe two competent receivers, and they don't always connect well with the QB. And they are, I mean, that's really all the similarities. Michigan's younger, but Michigan's also much more talented and probably better at every position, offensively and most positions defensively. For Northwestern defensively, Anto Saka, Michael Kilbane, and then safety Robert Fitzgerald are some players to pay attention to. Defensive end Aiden Hubbard, pay attention to him. They have a nice rotation of pass rushers. I'm curious to see how Michigan holds up in the passing attack against this Northwestern passing defense and pass rush. Speaking of that, it will be imperative for Bryce Underwood to play a clean game, to not turn it over the way he did against Purdue, and to be patient, and to not try to solely focus on scoring points, but focus more so on moving the ball to be in a position to where it's not all on you. And you and the offense can split duties, move the football, and put yourself in a position to score. I feel like against Purdue, he was trying to do too much. And with the supporting cast he has and the fact he's a true freshman and needs more development, that is not a good position for him to be in. Center Greg Crippen, running back Jordan Marshall, and then some offensive linemen, Giovanni El-Hadi, Nathan Afabi, Blake Frazier, Andrew Sprague. Pay attention to them. This is an offensive line that has come on its own over the past few weeks. It is a Joe Moore Award semifinalist, which sort of made me scratch my head a little bit, but upon looking at grades and remembering how well they've ran the ball ever since that USC game, and even before Haynes went out, they were running the ball effectively in that USC game. A lot of that has to do with not just their running backs, but their offensive line getting consistent push. And they've done a really good job protecting Bryce Underwood this year, which is impressive. So it's an offensive line that's among one of the nation's best, despite how young it is, outside of center, and I think it's left guard is where Giovanni El-Hadi is playing. Defensively, it's all Rayshawn Benny, Jayshawn Barham if he's healthy, linebacker Cole Sullivan if he's healthy. If not, Ernest Hausman, Derek Moore, some other great players in that Michigan front. The quarterback comparison here is a big reason why I'm actually going with Michigan to win. Michigan is a team where you look at week 2, where they lost to Oklahoma. You look at their loss to USC. Having inferior quarterback play in those games was a big part of the reason why they lost, and they lost big. Here, it's a trap spot. It's a spot that I don't like for the Wolverines, but also Preston Stone is one of the worst quarterbacks in the Power 4. Underwood's had some struggles, but he's not one of the worst. And combining that with a talent edge and Michigan coming off the bye and probably being healthy leads me to believe that Michigan here is going to win and Michigan's going to cover. Now, will they blow Northwestern out? Will it be over by halftime? I don't think so, but for how Northwestern has been offensively challenged and how Michigan has been able to score a baseline of 20 points just by running the football, and they should be healthier here, and I have a hard time seeing Underwood having another Purdue-level game. I do think they can get to a 14-point margin of victory somewhat comfortably. So I do like Michigan here to win. I like them to cover. Looking at the keys to the game and some matchups we'll get to in a few seconds here, whatever line of scrimmage comes out on top, that's going to be a deciding factor. Michigan, I think, has that checked off pretty easily. The power run game is something that I would have favored Northwestern in maybe a few weeks ago or definitely over a month ago, but Michigan's improved at that as the season's gone on. Reliable wide receiver 1, Northwestern has that in Griffin Wilde, but Donovan McCulley and Andrew Marsh are both capable of that. So shockingly, Michigan might have a better duo at wide receiver than Northwestern does. As for ball security, Michigan wins the turnover margin more often than Northwestern. Northwestern's going to have to change that if they want to win here. And as for run defense, Northwestern's not particularly effective at stopping the run. Michigan is not as good as they were last year, but they're much more effective than the Wildcats in that manner. I just think so much goes to Michigan here to where even with, at this point, I believe David Braun is a better game manager than Sharon Moore. Michigan's going to come out. They're going to win. They're going to cover. And as for the Big Ten standings, it keeps Michigan alive in the college football playoff and Big Ten championship game race. Michigan is to win out to participate in either of those. A 9-3 Michigan, I don't think gets in. Maybe there's a world if they beat Ohio State, but I think they have to win out to get in the Big Ten championship game and the college football, obviously the Big Ten championship game, but the college football playoff. They can get to the Big Ten championship game if they win out and if both USC and Oregon take an additional loss. If Oregon wins out, I'll have to fact check this, but if it is a three-way tie, given the strength of conference schedules, Big Ten schedules, among only Big Ten games, I think Oregon might get in Indy if they, Michigan, and Ohio State win out. But I'm unsure of that. That hasn't been sorted out who has the tougher schedule between those three yet if it results in a three-way tie. But as for this game, Michigan wins. They cover. They'll move on to Maryland. And then after that game, if they win it, move on to Ohio State to determine whether or not they can reach the playoffs and the Big Ten championship game. All right, we can move on to some other quick previews and predictions. NC State versus Miami. The NC State Wolfpack travel to play the Miami Hurricanes. It's going to be a 3:30 p.m. kickoff, ESPN. Miami's favored by 14.5, 15.5, depending on where you look. NC State is a low-caliber, mid-caliber ACC opponent. They got shellacked by Notre Dame, lost to Duke by double digits, lost to Pittsburgh by double digits, lost in a close battle to a Virginia Tech team that fired their coach. Their best win is Georgia Tech at home by 12, 48-36. That was a huge upset. And Virginia at home in what was a non-conference game between two ACC opponents, because they do that sometimes. For the Miami Hurricanes, Miami, their most impressive win of the year, Notre Dame 27-24, and they've had some good wins, but over the last 4 games, they're 2-2. Close loss to Louisville, overtime loss to SMU, dominant wins by the final score over Stanford and Syracuse, but those games were pretty close entering the half. Stanford was tied, I think, literally 7-7, and Syracuse was 14-0 with a Keontae Scott pick 6. Miami here could be in a bit of a pickle, in theory, and I say that because of their slow starts and an offense that's sort of anemic and turnover prone. Anyone can beat you when you play that way. But I have enough trust in Corey Heatherman, in their defense, in their offensive line, and honestly, the mental state of the team, where they're 15th in the college football playoff rankings. So they're in this thing. Not just the ACC championship game. If they win out and get help, that's possible they could go in there and win that. But they could get an at-large bid, too. So I'm picking Miami here to go above and beyond for this game and to at least win it. Do I think they'll cover? That is a important thing, because that will determine how the committee views you, how the analytics view you. I do believe NC State will cover. I think they have enough offense to them, enough of a competent coaching staff to them, and defense to put up a fight, and Miami is slow enough to make this game closer than it has to be with their conservative play style and offense. But Miami will hang around in the playoff conversation. I think they'll win here by probably 10. Even if they win by 14 points, they're not covering 14.5 or 15.5. Miami's just the better team overall. Better O-line, better D-line, better players at every position outside of maybe tight end with NC State's Justin Jolly. It's impressive, the roster that Miami has built, but what has not been impressive has been the on-field performances. So I'm going to stick with that and say that Miami is going to clearly be the better team here and win, but they're going to have some hiccups along the way. As for NC State, they're 5-4. They need one more win to earn bowl eligibility. I do think they will go bowling. Dave Doran has been over there for over a decade, and what also factors into this is they haven't been a good team this year, but they struggle to break through when people expect them to. And I think NC State, not just as a team but as a program, just is what they are. As for now, that's a similar case with Miami, but Miami is better here. I think the Hurricanes still have a good, maybe great football team, and that will help them earn a win here this Saturday. Now we can talk about South Carolina at Texas A&M. South Carolina, can they beat A&M on the road? A&M is ranked 3rd. They are coming off a huge win, 38-17 over Missouri. Huge win. South Carolina is coming off a bye. They're 1-6 in SEC play. If they lose here, they don't go bowling. And with Nick Harbor and Dylan Stewart and Lenora Sellers and how talented they've been, but how inconsistent that roster's been overall, I begin to wonder what the conversations are surrounding Shane Beamer and that South Carolina program, especially since A&M's an 18.5-point favorite. I mean, what if they cover? What if it gets really out of hand and they win by 30-plus points? What happens? What happens if they humiliate the South Carolina Gamecocks here? That would not be fun. That would not be good for Shane Beamer and for the Gamecock faithful. But will that happen? I don't quite know. Because South Carolina, they played Ole Miss on the road somewhat admirably. They played Alabama at home admirably. LSU on the road, they kept it within striking distance, similar to Missouri. They've been very inept offensively, good enough defensively to stay in games, but not as good as they were last year. They lost a lot. They failed to reload on almost all fronts. And as a result, you have 3 wins, you have 6 losses, and it looks like you're going to suffer a 7th here and maybe even an 8th against Clemson. And I don't know where the mentality of the team is. I don't know where the mentality of Shane Beamer is. These are very important conversations. And really, South Carolina this year, it's been the Lenora Sellers and Dylan Stewart show, and that's been really it. Outside of maybe Brandon Sissy. There's been a few good players on defense, but as a unit, it's not great. And the offense has been hot garbage outside of really Sellers and maybe Rashul Faison. This being a noon game in Aggie land, A&M is going to want that 10th win. This is also a revenge spot. Remember, South Carolina beat A&M last year 44-20. This is a revenge spot here for Mike Elko and this Texas A&M staff and team, which, panning over to their schedule, is one of the best teams in America. Maybe Aggie fans won't like this, but I'm going to be honest and say that I don't think they're number one. I don't think they're number two. I think that Ohio State and Indiana are better, and there might be a few other teams that could lay to claim there. But they're 9-0. They're undefeated. They beat Notre Dame on the road. They crushed LSU on the road, crushed Missouri on the road. Arkansas played them close, but that was very back and forth, and A&M was in the lead for that whole game. They dominated Florida the second half before they quit. The Auburn score was really 16-3. Auburn just had basically a pick six. That game could have been lopsided scoreboard-wise in favor of the Aggies if Reed didn't make that mistake. Reed's rising in Heisman odds because he's been getting better. And that offensive line with Armaj Reed Adams and Trey Zun III and Chase Basantis, is a game wrecker with what they have behind that. And then Mario Craver, Casey Conception, Terry Bussey. It's a Mike Elko team with an offensive first focus, but then they have Tareen York, Scooby Williams, Will Lee, Cassius Howell. They have enough on defense to make life really difficult for any team that plays them. And just look at how they've played these opponents. They've had some close games. Yes, I mean they are 3-0 in close games, but they've also had some dominant performances here. And I think if a loss is going to come upon the Aggies, it sounds very weird, but you get the point. If the Aggies are going to suffer a loss, it's going to be to Texas at the end of the year. It is not going to be to a South Carolina team that, outside of maybe pass defense, is going to hold up at all against this Aggie squad. I do think South Carolina covers, but in the sense that if A&M wins, it's going to be by 17 or 18 points. It's not going to be by, I don't think they're going to win by 20-something points or 30-something points. They could. If I'm wrong here, A&M wins this thing in a blowout, and maybe it signals the end of an era for South Carolina. I don't think that should happen. South Carolina is a very tough place to win. It has less football history and less of a reputation than, say, Iowa or even much of the Big Ten West, the former Big Ten West. So Beamer needs to be given some grace there. But I also don't know what the common expectation is for South Carolina. So that, with the talent they have and the fact that said talent might leave if they don't think they can win there or be properly developed, is cause for concern. I just think that A&M is better coached. They're the far better overall team. I mean, you look at ESPN's FPI, for example. Texas A&M in FPI is a top 8 team. They're a top 8 team. They are right now 7th with a 20.6 power rating. South Carolina is 40th with an 8.1. Factor in home field advantage there, and A&M should win this game by about 15 points. But South Carolina is probably propped up by priors and by recruiting rankings and by their tougher schedule and playing some of those, like having some close losses. South Carolina is probably worse than the 40th best team in America. So A&M will win this thing pretty convincingly. I just think South Carolina will maybe hold on around long enough to at least cover or maybe get a backdoor cover. Aggies win by 2 to 3 scores. They get to 10 wins. They'll get to 11th in their FCS game, and it will come down to that Texas game as to whether or not they will play in the SEC championship or receive a first-round bye to the college football playoff. But they're going to punch their ticket. In fact, I'm so confident in this game being a win that I think they already have. Utah and Baylor, our final preview of the day. The Utah Utes travel to play the Baylor Bears. Noon game on ESPN2. It's going to be in the 70s in Texas. Utah favored by 8.5 points. Baylor with Sawyer Robertson. The season hasn't quite gone as expected, but both teams, I believe, are coming off a bye, and you wonder how, with the situation Dave Aranda is in, with where Utah is at in the sense that at home they seem to be invincible outside of that Texas Tech game, but on the road they've been pretty vulnerable. Can there be some chaos here? Utah losing would certainly be a chaotic moment. It would not help Tech's resume. It wouldn't help the case for the Big 12. It would help Dave Aranda a lot. And Utah's ranked high enough, 13th in the college football playoff rankings, to where if they win out, if they beat Baylor, Kansas State, Kansas, and some other teams at the top lose, they could get an at-large bid if they are ranked this high. So that is something to keep in mind here. Crushing UCLA on the road, crushing Cal Poly, Wyoming, West Virginia, Arizona State, Colorado, Cincinnati. They lost to BYU competitively, and that Texas Tech game was close in the fourth quarter. Final score is a bit deceiving. Just a bit, though. Tech was clearly the better team in that game. This is a Utah team that's ranked top 10 in most power ratings, if not top 15. Love the job that Kyle Whittingham has done. That tackle duo of Caleb Lomu and Spencer Fano was one of the best in America. It's a Joe Moore Award semifinalist offensive line, and Morgan Scaley once again has a great defense. For the Baylor Bears, lost to an Auburn team that fired their coach, lost to Arizona State close, a healthy Arizona State team, lost to TCU competitively, got hammered a bit by Cincinnati, especially later in the matchup. They've been on the wrong side of some close losses. It's been another year where, defense isn't all that there. Offense is, especially in the passing game. I wonder if Dave Aranda is going to maybe try to sidestep his way out, if at all possible. I think he might have to win out or at least win 2 of his final 3 games to be able to do that. Or if he's going to stay at Baylor and he's committed to riding this thing out with some of the money they have behind the scenes in NIL, and the fact that if they win out, they'll be 8-4, 6-3, and it will be an improvement off of last year's campaign where they went 8-4 but lost their bowl game. So it'd be about the same, actually, as last year. But I think 8 wins at Baylor in the Big 12 is probably good enough for Dave Aranda to keep his job. At least I would think intuitively. I don't like Baylor in this spot, though. That's where I'll put it. I think Utah is able to match Baylor or surpass them in a variety of ways. They're better on both sides of the ball and will establish an early lead. Yes, Sawyer Robertson with Michael Trigg and Ashton Hawkins and his receivers and his offensive line should do a better job passing the ball than Utah with Devin Dampier, which is more of a run-based offense with Wayshawn Parker, those tackles that we talked about. But defensively, this is where I really love the Utes here. I mean, Utah is 3rd in rushing offense. They are 71st in rushing defense, but part of that's because they've played Tech and BYU and also Cincinnati. They've played some of the better rushing offenses, not just in the Big 12, but in America. They're 5th in pass defense. Baylor is 2nd in passing offense, but I think some of that could be exposed here. We'll see how that goes. I like Utah to win this game. I actually like them to cover too. I think, again, they're better on both sides of the ball. They're better coached. They have the better overall team. They're deeper. This could get ugly here for Baylor. It could also be a Baylor win because that is the nature of the Big 12, especially when the better team is playing on the road. But I like Utah to win and to cover here. Big Kyle Whittingham guy. Okay, now we can move on to bigger and brighter things. Thank you for staying through those previews. I really appreciate that. How long have we been live for? Oh, about 50 minutes. Just about 50 minutes, which is about 10 minutes. We're about 10 minutes behind here, but that's okay. Let's see what all of you are saying in the chat here. Um, hmm. Yeah, good conversation in the chat, guys. Good conversations there. Let's keep it up and let's keep it moving. We'll talk about now why Iowa should beat USC. The Iowa Hawkeyes are 6.5 point underdogs against the USC Trojans this Saturday. It'll be a 3:30 p.m. game Eastern time, 12:30 p.m. local time for USC. That's where it'll be kicking off, is at USC. And it'll be televised on the Big Ten Network. We want to talk about why Iowa should win here. I picked USC in my USC versus Iowa preview and prediction video. Link to that you can find in a reply to the pinned comment. I encourage you to watch it. But I do want to take the Iowa angle here because I do believe the Hawkeyes can win, and there are reasons why you should back them if you feel like they can pull off the upset or if you're picking it to happen. Reason number one, or at least the most important reason, I think, is Phil Parker, their defensive coordinator. If anyone can stop Lincoln Riley, it's Phil Parker. They have the sixth best defense per ESPN's efficiency ratings right now. When you look at defensive statistics from Game on Paper in adjusted EPA per play, Iowa is 11th in overall EPA per play, so not opponent adjusted, and sometimes opponent adjusted metrics can be sketchy. They are also 11th. It is a defense that in terms of EPA per dropback is third. In yards allowed per dropback, they are 17th. And in passing success rate allowed, I had to scroll down a little bit more. Oh, no, they're right there. They're 20th. And they only allow 4.1 yards per carry. They have a havoc rate of 11.6%. Most of that is from interceptions. They just do a really good job of tackling, being fundamentally sound, keeping their eye on the ball, reading the quarterback well, and scheming well-timed pressures, blitzes, and different defensive packages to frustrate opposing offenses. If anyone can out-coach and out-philosophy Riley as an offensive mind, it's the defensive mind of Phil Parker. Special teams, led by special teams coordinator LeVar Woods, who's a savant, much like Phil Parker is in his own way. Iowa's special teams can create momentum swings with punt returns for touchdowns, kickoff returns for touchdowns, with Drew Stevens being able to nail a 58-yard field goal against Oregon. He could have hit that from 60, too. So they have longer range weapons and more unique weapons and methods of scoring than the Trojans do. If this is a close game that comes down to special teams and field position, especially after the special teams errors of last week from Iowa, which I don't think Ferentz will let that be replicated. I don't think LeVar Woods will let that be replicated or duplicated within a two-game stretch. I really like Iowa to win here if this comes down to special teams. Lines of scrimmage is another reason. USC, I'll talk about it in my segment as to why USC should win. USC has their own reasons to be confident in their lines of scrimmage. As for Iowa, they have one of the best in college football. So we already talked about it. You know, below average havoc rate, but still good enough with Aaron Graves, Ethan Hurkett, Max Llewellyn, Carson Scherer to be able to get pressure to stop the run. That's their defensive front. First three players I mentioned are on their defensive line. When you look at their offensive line, in terms of havoc percentage allowed, Iowa's 11th, only allowing 9.3% of their plays to be havoc plays. That's a turnover, a sack, a TFL, a stuffed run. Their rushing success rate is a 47.3%. That is 8th nationally. They average 0.13 EPA per rush and 4.93 yards per carry. They're not explosive in rushing offense, but they do a very good job of getting consistent 3, 4, 5 yards per pop. That's what they did against Oregon. Sometimes Oregon stalwarted them. Oregon, outside of one play, didn't allow a rush of longer than 10 yards. Very good power rushing O-line. Can USC get behind the lines of scrimmage just maybe once or twice per drive to really force them in those third and longs where they're uncomfortable? That's the question. Iowa has a good enough trench situation to be able to say no, even though we struggle to pass the ball, we can run on you 10 times in a row and you don't get a TFL. They're that good there. The lockdown secondary with Zach Lutmer, TJ Hall, Deshaun Lee, Xavier Nwapka, and Cohen Ettringer, when you are third in EPA allowed per dropback at a negative 0.25 below typical EPA, what you are doing is you are scoring touchdowns on defense. You are picking off opposing quarterbacks more often than they throw for touchdowns on you. That was the case with Drake Lindsey. That was the case with Dante Moore. Those two quarterbacks had a combined 0 passing touchdowns, 4 interceptions between them. They didn't let Iowa score a single point on them. They shut them out 37-0, and they have 3 losses, yes, but they picked off Mendoza, allowed a touchdown, though, an explosive play there, and they did an all-right job against Rocco Becht back when, others, including myself, thought that Iowa State might be a really good team. Turns out they were just average. This is a lockdown secondary that has improved as the years gone on. What I like about them against USC is USC's receiver core is not deep. It is very thin. It is the Jacoby Lane and Makai Lemon show. That's about it. And Iowa's defensive backs are an improvement off of last year's defensive backs. They brought many of them back. They're improved. So if they are able to get some pressure, or maybe not get some pressure, but just be able to find a way to maybe mitigate the possession catchability of Lane and find a way to cover Lemon, maybe not one-on-one, but bracket, I think they could have success in pass defense. The last point I want to make is their run defense. So they allow a very high success rate. They rarely get TFLs. They rarely get initial movement on the lines of scrimmage. Iowa's defensive line and run defense does, but they do not allow rushing explosives. And even more than Oregon, USC has been very reliant on those. USC's rushing attack with Riley, they do a very good job of creating big gaping holes. They do a good job of pull blocking, power running. They can do counter. They can do a little bit of everything. They can. But I don't think they have the rushing attack that Oregon does. As I say there, Iowa only allows 4.1 yards per carry. That's top 20 in rushing defense. They do not have the size or the depth that Oregon does. Both, now that USC's unfortunately suffered injuries to Wayman Jordan, Eli Sanders, be praying for them that they'll heal up. They don't have the depth, size, power, or talent at running back or O-line that Oregon does. They just do not. So I like Iowa's rushing defense here to at least initially give USC some issues that Riley might have to make second half adjustments for. That's why Iowa should beat USC. Again, I'm picking USC to win, but there are several pathways and reasons why the Hawkeyes can win here. Let me know your thoughts and check out, in a reply to that pinned comment, my USC versus Iowa preview and prediction video if you have not already. Let's move on to why USC should beat Iowa. We can talk about that here. Let me just make sure I'm in the right spot. I'm not, but now we are. Here's why the USC Trojans should beat the Iowa Hawkeyes as 6.5 point favorites. I did pick USC here to win and to barely cover. I did make a preview and prediction video for this game. You should check it out. Link is in a reply to the pinned comment. And I did also make a segment about why Iowa should expect to win this game. But as for the Trojans, there are several reasons and angles that I want to discuss. And the first of which, and the most important, is they have the superior ground attack. Iowa does not have the passing attack to be able to win through the air if they can't win on the ground, barring something crazy happening, which, be it this version of USC and this version of Iowa, could create a very crazy result. But following typical football logic, when you have the superior air attack, which we already know USC does, but on top of that, the superior rushing offense, it will take an amazing effort from Iowa to be able to overcome that. USC's averaging 6.47 yards per carry, which is third, and they're fourth in rushing success rate. They are better than the Hawkeyes in both of those areas and dramatically superior in rushing offense in terms of yards per carry and rushing yards per game. King Miller, running back 3 for them, he could be an RB1 at a lot of different schools. And he stayed healthy so far, has a ton of burst. even has some power to him. I love him as a running back. And this USC offensive line, even with some of the adversity and injuries they've suffered, is functioning as one of the best in America. That's why they're a Joe Moore Award semifinalist. Same with Iowa. And I would say analytically, USC deserves it. There are sometimes teams that reach the Joe Moore Award mid-roll or honor roll or the semifinalist list that you think, wait, why are they there? That's not the case with USC. Riley and his staff has done a really good job putting together this offense and offensive line. And that's what we're talking about right now. Their havoc rate allowed is fourth in America, just 8.6%. When you look at Jaden Maiava, huge part of reason why he's been successful, Maiava this year, I think he's only thrown 6 interceptions, 17 touchdowns. He's second in QBR with a 90.6, only behind Julian Sayin. Big part of the reason why he's been so successful is he's only been sacked 9 times. And that's including defenses like Notre Dame, Michigan, Illinois, Nebraska, and Northwestern that either at the time they played them or throughout the entire year have good pass rushers. This is a offensive line that I love it. And despite the fact that it in theory and on paper lacks depth, in preseason lacked some talent, this might be Riley's best offensive line outside of that 2022 unit that he partially inherited from the Clay Helton era. Explosive plays are another reason why USC should beat Iowa here. So they're 6.5-point favorites at home. Iowa's to travel a long ways. Iowa's defense, though, they're locked down, especially in pass defense. But the risk they take with one-on-one coverage and playing like people aren't going to call PIs on them, which in Big Ten play, that's absolutely true. And they do a good job overall. It's one of the best defensive teams in America, and Phil Parker, he's up there for being the best defensive coordinator. I'd say after Knowles' performances so far this year, his argument to be number one is very strong. I actually, a little bit of a side tangent here, I still think Knowles, with some things I've heard from insiders and people I trust about Penn State, I still think he's number one. I just don't think Franklin ever meshed with the staff properly. It's just my opinion. Know plenty of people will disagree with that. But him and Parker are in their own tier, and that's special. For Phil Parker, though, we saw this against Indiana where they would blitz and send pressure, and if the offensive line for his opponent protected the QB well enough, and the QB was a sturdy, great player, Mendoza, he could deliver the football accurately and create a big play. And I think USC has a prime opportunity to do that here with a great downfield passing attack that they have. D'Anton Lynn is an important reason because of how Iowa will be able to create enough offense in theory to probably get to the 20s. They have a much better offense than Northwestern, and Northwestern got to 17. If their defensive tackle didn't fumble the football into the end zone, they could have gotten to 24. If not, they would have had a short field and gotten 24 anyway, or at least 20. USC's defense is far from perfect. They will need to get some key stops here. It can't be all on the offense here, because if it is all on the offense, Iowa can chew clock, control the pace of the game, and probably at least force a turnover or one mistake and win that way. Lynn is going to have to come up with some stops. His defense will have to play well, and I think they will, because Lynn is one of the best in the business. He should put together enough good plays, enough solid drives and adjustments to slow Iowa down and force some punts and give USC's offense a chance to be able to figure things out and not have to be perfect. And finally, this is less to do with USC, but this is important here. The travel of Iowa, traveling to USC after that Oregon game is tough. It's a tough spot after a emotional loss, and I think Iowa's well coached, so I don't think they'll lay down and die here. They're not going to have a mental issue, but physically, they're going to be more beat up after playing Oregon on Saturday than USC is hosting Iowa and having their most recent game being played against Northwestern on a Friday night, where they were able to pull away in the third and fourth quarter. So it's just a tough spot for Iowa. Those are the reasons why USC should beat the Iowa Hawkeyes. Let me know what you think of my reasons and analysis down in the comment section below. Whew. I am thirsty. Let's put it that way. I am thirsty. So I am going to, with all of that being said, we are just over an hour into this. Okay, perfect. I'm going to go grab a quick drink of water. Let me see if there's any super chats in here. Any of them? Doesn't look like it, no. Okay. Hey, K. Smitty. How are you doing? Nice to see you pop in here. Okay. Yeah, I'm being a bit indecisive because I'm tired and rushed, but still think we're having a really good show. I'm producing a lot of quality content here, just on a little bit of a shorter timetable. So I'm going to be back. Just going to get a quick drink of water. See you guys really soon. Thank you for your patience. Really appreciate it, guys. Just trying to see where I'm at in the show sheet, because that's important stuff. I have this whole show sheet that's not exactly perfectly organized, but there we have it. Okay. Next up, or right now, actually, we'll talk about why Texas can beat Georgia. It's really nice to have like all you guys in here. I know it's a Thursday night. Our goal is to have more concurrent viewers. That's our goal. We did have that really good. We get a lot of love on the reaction shows, but we have to do a better job with the previews and making sure that we can reach all of you. Some of these other shows I see get like several hundreds of concurrent viewers now, or thousands. That'll be us one day. It's not us right now, though. The Texas Longhorns are 6.5-point underdogs to the Georgia Bulldogs this Saturday in a critical SEC game with SEC championship implications, with college football playoff implications. Texas is alive for all these things, by the way. And if they can put everything together, not only can they win this game and win the Lone Star Showdown with Texas A&M, but they can win it all. You heard it here first. Although you probably heard it first from Bald Father Betts if you've been paying attention. Wonderful show. Awesome Longhorns fan. Very objective about it, though. You wouldn't know that he's a Longhorns fan in the same way that many of you probably wouldn't know that I'm a Michigan fan when I talk about him. But anyway, enough of that being said. Here's why Texas should beat Georgia. They're 6.5-point underdogs, and they have several reasons why not only they should cover, but win this game in Athens. You might be thinking to yourself, well, Steve Sarkisian can't beat Kirby Smart. He hasn't beaten Kirby Smart. I think Kirby Smart's a better head coach, but there are some areas where Texas has a matchup edge over the Bulldogs, one of them being the passing mismatch. Texas's passing offense, I'm telling you, with how Arch Manning has been playing recently, and with how the offensive line seems to have gelled together, right now their passing offense combined and average with their passing defense is greater than Georgia's average in those two categories. If Texas can make this a game about passing the football, they have a really good chance to win, especially since they've been able to match the special teams that Georgia has produced, upgrading their kicker and punter. That's Jack Bomeister and Mason Shipley, bringing them in. But that passing game mismatch is big for the Texas Longhorns. Offensive chemistry is something, too, that I already have alluded to, but let me go more in detail. Texas ran for over 4 yards per carry on a Vanderbilt team that is top 25 in run defense. They were top 25 in sacks per game, too, before that matchup, and I think Texas held them to maybe 1 or 2, just off the top of my head. Manning didn't get pressured all that much, and he had a really good game. The offensive line has improved. They, against Mississippi State and Vanderbilt and that second half of the Oklahoma game, had a ton of success offensively. I like where they're headed. And I think that maybe off of the bye, getting some players back healthy, resting the team after having that whole month stretch without a home game and then having that big Vanderbilt win, if maybe they come out against Georgia and show their best version of themselves all year. And it's not like Georgia's invincible. If this were 2021 Georgia, I would pick Georgia to win by 3 to 4 touchdowns, maybe even 5. That's how big of a difference I think that 2021 Georgia has to the rest of just the good teams of 2025. But that isn't the case here. This is not Georgia of 4 or 5, 3 years ago. It's not. This Georgia team, while improved from last year in a variety of areas, is closer to last year's team than the teams that came before the 2024 squad. And this Texas team is closer to your 2024 and 2023 squad than it is to your 2022 or 2021 Texas teams. The offensive line, brush over it again really quickly, it seems to be finding itself. Trevor Gooseby and DJ Campbell are graded very highly per Pro Football Focus. They look good on film. Campbell has been praised for the entire year, and I think Gooseby has come on as the season has progressed. Georgia can't really get to the quarterback. They struggle to get pressure. So that combined with the passing mismatch and everything just kind of coming together makes me really love Texas here. For context, I did pick Georgia to win, but I did pick Texas to cover. And if not for that Kirby Smart, Steve Sarkisian coaching mismatch, I can certainly tell you that I think I would have picked Texas to win here. I do think Texas is live, just can't quite push that big red button to pick them to win. The run defense, they only allow 3.78 yards per carry. That's 6th. And they allow negative 0.19 EPA per rushing attempt, which is 4th. It is a run defense that is about at the same level as Georgia's, and Georgia has an elite run defense. So what if this run defense, especially with Taft back at safety, is good enough to where they can shut down Georgia's rushing attack and make it a passing game between an improving, more confident Arch Manning and Gunnar Stockton? What if? Because if that's the case, then I really love Texas's chances here, especially since with a healthy Michael Taft back, the DBs and the secondary and the passing defense will improve. That I know for sure. So those are some reasons why Texas should beat Georgia. If you are a Longhorn fan, you should feel quietly good about this game. Doesn't mean that you will win. There's a reason Georgia's favored by more than 3 points, and that says they'll be favored on a neutral field if they played there. But there are reasons why you should feel confident here about winning. Again, I'm not picking them to, but those are the reasons why Texas should beat Georgia. This should be a wonderful game. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This should be a wonderful night game, way to close out what should already be a pretty excited Saturday slate full of chaos. Now we can talk about why Georgia should beat the Texas Longhorns. I'm actually picking Georgia to win this game. Doubting Kirby Smart is for the foolish and the weak-minded and just weak overall. It's not a good move. It's not backed up by history either. I'm picking Georgia to beat Texas. Here are some reasons why the Georgia Bulldogs, as 6.5-point favorites, should win. I think the biggest reason is offensive line play. This was an area which prevented Georgia from fully destroying Texas last year, was that Texas's defense was elite, and Georgia's offensive line, while it showed up in those two games, was questionable enough to where it was really Georgia winning the turnover battle or the special teams battle or Georgia winning the pass rush battle more than anything else that really helped them to win those games. But now, this offensive line is leaps and bounds ahead of where it was last year. I don't know if it's better from an NFL talent angle, but they're running the ball better. They're protecting Gunnar Stockton better. Stockton's shown mature enough quarterback maneuverability in the pocket and is a good enough scrambler to keep defenses on their toes, and he's a good distributor. I mean, there's a reason he's top 5 in QBR, guys. He's one of the nation's better QBs. I really love the fact that where Texas is getting healthier and they are just from a chemistry standpoint offensively making steps forward, as they seem to be peaking and figuring things out, Georgia can, tip their cap to their trench play and say that we got this and we can control a good team. Their rushing offense plays into that, but when you have a 44% rushing success rate, and a 44% rushing success rate is 30th in America, they allow 11.7% of their plays to be havoc plays. And look, it's not an explosive rushing offense, but it is, you consistently get 2, 3, 4 yards per pop. And you would rather have that than a rushing offense that maybe statistically is better, but isn't as reliable in power situations. And against a Texas defense that is not going to allow a lot of explosive runs, you'd rather have Georgia's rushing offense than, say, USC's, I would say. Where USC's rushing offense is one of the nation's best, but in power situations against a type of a D-line that Texas has, I think you'd rather have Georgia's rushing offense. Although, again, I think USC's overall is better. That's what determines these games, are matchups. And sometimes, Team A, and they play Team B, and Team B beats them, for example. But sometimes you then go, and Team C is inferior to Team A, but Team C beats Team B because Team C matches up better with them, even though Team A is the overall superior team. And I think that you have some of that stuff here that goes both ways, in favor of the Longhorns, in favor of the Bulldogs. If you want to learn more, check out, in a reply to my pinned comment, my preview and prediction video for this game. And also, I'll link down below my reasons why Texas should beat Georgia video. But run defense is an area where Georgia actually might have the edge. Texas is 6th in yards per carry allowed. Georgia is 5th. When you look at defensive rushing success rate, when you look there, Texas, they're 24th. Georgia, defensively, 55th. Lower, but from a yards per carry standpoint, they allow less. Georgia has a negative 0.110 EPA per rush attempt allowed. Texas, I can tell you, yeah, intuitively is better from the segment I just did on them. But it's still an elite rushing defense, I would say. When you allow a high success rate, all that means is that you don't get a ton of TFLs. And that makes sense based on what we know about Georgia's defensive front and failing to get pressure. They don't get a lot of pressure or penetration, but they also don't allow you to get those big gashers. And it's not like Texas has been able to find its footing consistently for multiple games in a row in running the football. So this is going to have to be more of an Arch Manning game if Texas wants to win. And that is something, that is a matchup, that is a comparison that does not fall in favor of the Longhorns, is quarterback play. Now, passing offense versus defense, I think, favors Texas, if not by quite a bit. But just having the better quarterback, I think that's an area where Georgia actually wins right now. Does Manning have more talent? Absolutely. Has Manning played better? Absolutely not. Gunnar Stockton has outplayed Arch Manning all season long. Gunnar Stockton is one of the better quarterbacks in America. Preseason, I made a video talking about why people shouldn't be worried about how good he is. That take has aged well, and I was actually too low on him. He's third in QBR, 15 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's crossed 2,000 passing yards, and he has a 153.4 passer rating. That's pretty good if you ask me. So I'm confident that Georgia's the superior quarterback play here. And last but not least, Kirby Smart, better coach than Steve Sarkisian, owned him the previous 2 times in terms of adjustments, in terms of game planning. Now that it's in Athens and Georgia was able to quickly clean up that Mississippi State team and get out ahead of the curve there, I think that Georgia is going to win. Don't know if they'll cover, but a win is all that matters right now. And I think they will earn that in Sanford Stadium. Those are my thoughts on why Georgia should beat Texas. Let me know what you think. Love to hear your thoughts, analysis if you agree with me, or if you disagree with me. Speaking of like kind of a new topic, a change of pace here, the NCAA decided that vacating wins was appropriate for Michigan State's violations. I don't really want to talk about this too long. I just want to briefly discuss kind of how insane this is, because it is insane. It's crazy. How else can I put it? Where Michigan State plays ineligible players that probably didn't help Mel Tucker, and they have to vacate wins for that. And then you have the whole like Michigan thing just down the road. And I know that Michigan didn't have ineligible players. That's why wins weren't vacated. But it's just it's funny. It's a little bit stupid. I just wanted to talk about it. So the NCAA has vacated Michigan's 2022 through 2024 victories. And I don't want to spend too much of my time talking about this because I don't think it does all that much harm to Michigan State, and I don't think in the long term it matters all that much. What mattered were the wins in 2021 with Kenneth Walker and the Peach Bowl, and vacating wins is meaningless anyway. We've talked about this here before on College Football with Sam. Like, no one thinks that USC didn't win the 2004 national championship. Like, no one believes that. This is outrageous because I thought someone was entering my room there, but it turned out it was just a dust molecule. The fact that Michigan State had to pay a fine 1.5% of their football budget or their athletic revenue, and they had to vacate wins, is just it's crazy. What's crazy about this is that Michigan State had to vacate their win over Central Michigan, where Connor Stallions is literally, he's right there. He's right there on the Central Michigan sidelines, illegally scouting, recording signals, dressed up in a staffer's uniform for Central Michigan. Like, he's right there. And it wasn't Central Michigan who had to vacate that. It was Michigan State. And that's why this is insane, ultimately. I don't have many thoughts on this. The NCAA vacated Michigan State's 2022 through 2024 seasons. It's due to Michigan State playing a handful of ineligible players under Tucker and they continue to play under Smith, though they're no longer with the Michigan State program. And my thing is just, why? Why NCAA? Why do you do this? You're completely useless. I mean, I'm a Michigan guy, but I said from the get-go that Michigan cheated and Michigan deserved some type of punishment. All that happened is that Michigan's former staffers were hit with show causes that weren't even permanent. They were very long-term, but not permanent. Michigan got their college football playoff revenue taken away, and that only really matters if they make the college football playoff. And they didn't get any postseason ban, which, I didn't think was going to happen, didn't even necessarily know if it should have happened, but they didn't get it. They didn't vacate any wins because they didn't have any eligible players. And yet Michigan State here, those ineligible players probably didn't even help Mel Tucker or Smith win games. In fact, knowing how bad Tucker was at scouting and development, they probably helped them lose games. And vacating wins doesn't do anything. It's just, it's hypocritical. There's a bit of a double standard going on where I just think the rules are weird. How they enforce penalties on Michigan State for improper benefits or ineligible players at a time where we are, like, Derek Harmon was making $1 million at Michigan State defensive tackle before he went to Oregon, or somewhere around that ballpark. Bryce Underwood is making $12 million over a 3-year deal. It's just, why? Why are we focusing on this? Why are we punishing this? And why are we taking this under a microscope when there are more pressing things to talk about? It's just, I'm trying to make sense of it. I don't know if I can make sense of it. I guess part of it's the weird NCAA rules around vacated wins are only due to ineligible players and not anything else. So that explains the difference between Michigan State and Michigan there on the vacated wins front. I do think it's hypocritical in the sense that it's so small, where Michigan's thing was bigger. It just was. That's actually why Michigan got the $20+ million fine, and Michigan State just got fined 1.5% of their athletic revenue, plus, like, I think $30,000 off the top of my head. Why bother doing anything? It's so small. It was under the prior regime. Those players are not on the current roster anymore. Why bother doing anything? It's just weird, I guess. It's strange. It's hypocritical. I am one of those very rare Michigan fans that likes it when Michigan State is good. And for Michigan State to just incur humiliation after humiliation after humiliation, and this one isn't one on the field, it's off the field in kind of an optional way. Like, this probably didn't have to go about this way, unlike Saturdays, where you can't really change the outcome. It's sad. It's rock bottom for Michigan State football. I do think Michigan State one day will field a good football team and program again. There's just too much history there, too many wealthy alumni, but it seems to be that the focus is on basketball, and I think that the donors and the billionaires, unfortunately, want a certain archetype at head coach, and one that I don't think exists all that much anymore, or if they do, depending on who they think that archetype is, they wouldn't fit well in the modern era. Like D'Antonio, with a few tweaks, could. Urban Meyer, come on. No, you can't get away with kicking your players anymore. You just can't do that. That worked at a time. We can argue whether it was ethical or not. Probably wasn't. It doesn't work anymore. Like, college football in a player-head coach relations standpoint is more like the NFL than ever, and Meyer's been out of the game for a while. So if that's who the donors want, is the image of someone rather than an actual working head coach, then Michigan State's not going to be successful. And I feel like that's what's going on here. As for why Michigan State accepted this punishment, why they didn't fight it, despite the change in leadership, bringing in Jay Batt, who is a better athletic director with more of a spine and with just a better resume than Alan Haller. There are some theories floating around, and I want to entertain two of them. Does this maybe make Tucker go away? where since ineligible players participated under his watch, they can basically fire him for breaking the rules, and now there's just an official football-related reason as to why he can't get his money. You have the morality clause, now you have he broke football rules, and those two things combined means that you can just dismiss any attempts by Tucker to get his buyout, and maybe you could use it as an excuse to boot Smith. I mean, those players were also ineligible under his watch. Now, they were Tucker holdovers, so that would probably be a pretty slimy way to get rid of Smith. But maybe that's how they get rid of him, is they say, hey, they were under your watch too, and it's sketchy. It might even be scummy, but you use that to save money from his buyout too and get the next head coach with how poorly it's gone. I don't know. I really don't know. As for Michigan State, the rest of the schedule, the roster they have, the injuries they have, the opt-outs, all that stuff will sort itself out. But I can safely say with only 3 games remaining for Michigan State, they're not going to go bowling. You're not going to beat Penn State, Iowa, and Maryland, barring a miracle. So maybe this is an excuse to boot Smith, but it's frustrating. It's a little comical in a cynical way, but this is just, it's hypocritical. It's a bit ridiculous. I don't know why the NCAA decided to punish Michigan State for this. It's just, come on, guys. The NCAA needs to go away. It's powerless. We need a true enforcement arm in college football. And as for the Michigan State Spartans, their football program's currently in a black hole. I think one day it'll come out. It'll be pulled out. But as for when, I have no idea. I've picked Michigan State to do well under Smith. They have not. I thought that Tucker would at least last a little bit longer than he did. He did not. Dark times are here in East Lansing, and I hate to say I don't know when they're going to end. I do not know when they're going to end, guys. Wish I could tell you when I knew, but I do not know when they're going to end. I don't. Hate to say it, but it is what it is. Okie dokie. Okie dokie. Trying to think through a few things here. Just trying to think through a few things. Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. Let's look at the chat. Commissioner Sam. I like that, Quinn. Yeah, I've talked Notre Dame, Pittsburgh. I picked Pittsburgh initially. I've switched my pick to Notre Dame, just so it's official on air. I made a community post about it. I made a pinned comment for that preview and prediction video. The line is just moving in Notre Dame's favor a bit too much. So I like Notre Dame now to win. I probably don't like them to cover, but I like them to at least win. The line's just moving too far in Notre Dame's direction to where I'm not going to go against Sharps in that game, especially when there's that big of a talent difference. Michigan State needs a head coach who is patient, wise, captures the locker room, and is an elite developer with the opportunity to raise Michigan State's floor and ceiling in recruiting. Let's take a look at who I think some good candidates for the Michigan State coaching job would be. I want to start off with some future head coaches. These are coordinators, great coordinators, either offensive or defensive, who I think could work out just about anywhere, who could search out job opportunities almost anywhere again, and that I think have what it takes from a youth standpoint, a success standpoint, from mastering their craft where they're at standpoint, to succeed. I think these are future good head coaches. They are Brian Hartline, Mike Shanahan, Will Stein, Glenn Schumann, Bryant Haynes, and Corey Heatherman. 3 offensive coordinators, 3 defensive coordinators. I know that maybe some of these seem unrealistic. or maybe you don't like some of them, but think about what Mike Shanahan and Brian Haynes and Corey Heatherman have done in their time at Indiana, and then Corey Heatherman actually worked under Cignetti at, I believe, JMU, but has worked as a DC at Minnesota and Miami. Think of what they've done with lesser talent. And they've come in and they've just immediately changed everything. Heatherman has completely restructured Miami's defense to be a top 20, top 15, maybe top 10 unit. Haynes is commanding a unit that has an argument to be the best defense in America. Shanahan is commanding a Indiana offense that at peak efficiency could be the best in America. Schumann has worked under Smart for years. I don't think the current defensive issues are his fault. I think some of that's more personnel based. Will Stein at Oregon, great developer and schemer, especially for quarterbacks, but also just offenses in general. And Hartline, he's the greatest position coach of all time. And I think he has what it takes as a leader, talent evaluator, and developer. So those are some future head coaches that Michigan State might want to reach out to. Again, I know Jonathan Smith isn't technically fired, but I think his time has come to an end. I think that he will be gone at the end of the year. I think that the recent developments about the Michigan State, ineligible players, cheating, violations, whatever, might be used as a excuse to get rid of him, where you take the temporary humiliation, take the slap on the wrist, use it to say that Smith played ineligible players and maybe get out of his contract. I don't know. But even before that, I thought with the 3-6 record that things just are not going to work out there. Could be wrong, but I want to get ahead of this and get this out here. Some out of the box hires for the Spartans. Scott Satterfield, Cincinnati. They've been able to run the ball well. They have a quarterback in Brennan Sorsby who has another year of eligibility, played in the Big Ten before at Indiana, looks really good. I think that he's a sketchy hire. I don't know if I would hire him, but Michigan State's hired a coach from Cincinnati before in Mark D'Antonio. Don't think Satterfield's D'Antonio, but if they continue to win, there might be something to him, or at least to parts of his roster or his coordinators. And Michigan State's a better job than Cincinnati. Chris Kleiman from Kansas State. This will be Kansas State's worst season since 2020. A lot of that had to do with the trip to Ireland, the fact that Dylan Edwards got hurt and didn't pan out, and I don't think they reloaded in the trenches as well as I thought they would. Avery Johnson has another year of eligibility. Kleiman is a really good head coach, I think, who won the Big 12 back when Oklahoma and Texas were in it in 2022, beat 13-2 TCU in the Big 12 championship game. I think that Michigan State can recruit better than Kansas State. Michigan State's in a better conference. They have bigger pockets, better donors, better athletic department. And with how Mel Tucker and Jonathan Smith have performed back-to-back, I do think that Michigan State might be a little bit more patient. And that could go with Kleiman's philosophy, where they've used the portal selectively, but a lot of it is recruiting, bringing in his staff, his guys, and letting them, letting the concrete settle. Dave Aranda, what if he wants to sidestep out of Baylor and you think there's something to him and you take a chance on him? Wouldn't do it, similar with Scott Satterfield, but an option I wanted to put up there since he's worked in the Big Ten before as a defensive coordinator, been a head coach in the Big 12, which I think is a more similar league to the Big Ten, or at least to the average Big Ten team, than the ECC or SEC. Sean Lewis from San Diego State, he's having success there. He's been an offensive coordinator at Colorado, a head coach at Kent State. Michigan State is a big rebuild job. Why not pull him? He's been the master of rebuilds. Matt Entz from Fresno State, head coach at North Dakota State. You realize I'm pulling a lot of Midwestern or Great Plains guys. I think those types are great fits for this job. And then, while he's still on the market, and I know he probably wants Wisconsin, but Wisconsin's going to keep fickle, take Jason Eck. Jason Eck's had success at Idaho. He's having success at New Mexico. Maybe it's too big of a jump to go like Idaho, New Mexico, and then Michigan State in all the span of 3 years. But I think he's a good coach and a great motivator of men and a developer of men. So Maybe you give him a chance. Again, these are out-of-the-box hires. These are not the top-tier hires. These are just head coaches that maybe you want to take a risk on, and you could maybe strike gold with them. Some proven head coaches that I think could work out here. Jake Dickert. You could bring Scotty Hazelton back. Of course, I'm saying that as a little bit of a jab, but their defense is 5th in ESPN's efficiency right now. Like, part of me, I used to mock it when my dad, who's a Spartan fan, would talk about it, how he didn't think Hazelton was the problem. I used to mock him for it. But he had some limited success at Kansas State. He was an analyst with Texas and helped their defense in 23. And Wake's defense is really good this year. Like, maybe that was a Tucker and Harlan Barnett thing, or just simply a portal misevaluation thing. And maybe with better coaching and development, strength and conditioning, Hazelton could actually be a good defensive coordinator. Maybe. Outside of that, though, you wouldn't have to bring Hazelton. You could just bring Jake Dickert, who has had limited success at Wazoo, is bringing Wake Forest to a bowl game. He's definitely a builder, and I think Michigan State needs that type of guy. Fleck is another example. And keep in mind, for all of these coaches we've talked about so far, with maybe, depending on what Michigan State's donors are willing to do, like maybe the exception of Aranda, for all of these coaches, Michigan State would be an upgrade either from a job hierarchy standpoint for those coordinators we discussed, or from a resources and conference and university prestige standpoint. For all that would even be an upgrade from Baylor, but I know Baylor has deep pockets, and I don't know what MSU's donors are doing with football or where they're at with the football program. But Fleck, he'd have more resources than he does at Minnesota. He has proven to be able to win 8, 9, 10 games at Minnesota for more than half his seasons and at least gets you to a bowl every year. They beat the teams they should beat. They get humiliated by the great teams, but sometimes play them very competitively. And he has a quarterback in Drake Lindsey with a few more years of eligibility. Darius Taylor probably isn't going to the league this year, so he could come to Michigan State for a year. And they have Coy Parrish, and Fleck's a culture guy. So if he leaves Minnesota, a lot of the players that are there, the good ones, he could take with him because of that bond. Alex Golish, take a risk on a G5 head coach. I think he's a good one. I think he'd pan out well. Similar with Bob Chesney. Him and Golish are bringing USF and JMU to very successful seasons. Again, you're taking a risk with those guys, but I think they in particular could pan out unlike a lot of other G5 coaches. David Braun from Northwestern. Couldn't bring a ton of players with him, but I think he's a solid coach and has learned a lot in 3 years at Northwestern. Matt Campbell from Iowa State. Maybe Iowa State, he's been there forever, and after this year, he's not going to be a hot name with that collapse that they've had. I mean, maybe if they went out and go 9-4, he could be a hot name again, or just finish the year 8-4. But for Michigan State, he'd be an upgrade. And he does more with less. He'd be able to recruit better at Michigan State. And I kind of think that with, how he's been able to keep that staff together and what he does on offense and defense, maybe that's your new D'Antonio. I don't know. And then last but not least, these are the A-tier and S-tier head coaches from Michigan State. We have Jed Fish, Brett Bielema, and James Franklin. And from outside the Big Ten, we got Manny Diaz, Jeff Brom, and Brent Key. I couldn't find a lot of S-tier and A-tier candidates from the Big 12. I don't think there are that many. And if there are, I think they will go to other jobs. Like Kenny Dillingham, if you're Michigan State, that'd be a coup to pull off. I don't think it'll happen. If you could somehow pull off Kalani Sitake, even though he's been at BYU for his whole life and most of his coaching career, an elite head coach could bring some transfers, that'd be a coup. Don't think it'll happen. There are probably some other names that I might be forgetting, but that's really it. I mean, Kleiman and Campbell have disappointed a little bit this year. I don't know if I'd take a risk on Satterfield. And Whittingham's a Utah lifer and will retire soon. So, yeah, Fish reported. I've been hearing rumors. This is not anything that I have on credible information, by the way. I've put out some stuff that I don't have on paper evidence to back up, but I've had reliable sources tell me before. I don't have anything for this, but my friend, him and I were chatting, and he's decently connected. He was telling me that, and again, this is rumors here, so you can dismiss it if you want, that Jed Fish and that his family doesn't like Seattle. Don't know if that means anything, but he told me, so I thought, why not run a bit with it, especially since Washington, from a football history standpoint, from a job standpoint, probably isn't a ton better than Michigan State. Maybe it's realistic. I don't think he'd go to Michigan State, but I don't know. Put him on the list. Brett Bielema, Michigan State is a better job than Illinois, but how much better? And is Bielema willing to reset an entire program? He could bring a lot of Illinois' roster with him, of course. Again, culture guy. So if he leaves, I bet you a lot of Illinois players would go, especially since this is Altmaier's final year. So you're naturally going to have a reset and kind of a downstretch for Illinois next year. You could just hit the whole reset button and go to Michigan State. I don't know if that would work out, but given Illinois is on track to have back-to-back 9-3 regular seasons, might be a good option. James Franklin, you wouldn't win the big games, but he's a great builder and a good recruiter. So he could level up Michigan State to earn 8-9 wins per year, maybe even get him to 10 depending on the schedule, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. And then for the ACC, we got Manny Diaz, Jeff Brom, Brent Key. Either of those would be slam dunk hires. Diaz is a defensive guy who's embraced offense, so you get the whole package. Brom, we saw what he did at Purdue and what he's doing at Louisville. MSU's a better job than both of those, so he'd have more resources. Brent Key has the J-Bat connection, and if you can bring him with his staff, Blake Gideon and Buster Faulkner, the coordinators, I think you could turn Michigan State around pretty quickly. Again, as I've said, Michigan State needs someone who is patient, wise, captures the locker room, and while they can upgrade Michigan State from a recruiting angle, they need to be more developmentally based. And I think that list pretty much nails down a lot of the possible candidates that fit that bill. Okay. Wait, what? Did I just... Oh, I forgot that. Okay, let's see how much more time I have. Probably have enough time. Yeah, we have enough time. That was a good segment. That's probably going to be the longest segment remaining for the show. All right. Now I want to talk about, just briefly, why I think Ohio State's the best team in college football. Bless me. Here's why Ohio State is the number one team in college football today. I think it's a battle for number one. So between Ohio State, Alabama, and Indiana, I think there are strong arguments for all to be number one. But as of right now, I side with the Buckeyes, and here's why. They have the number one overall defense. The last four champions had elite defenses. Ohio State last year, Michigan the year before that, Georgia in 22, and Georgia in 21. If I had to rank all of those defenses, it'd be 21 Georgia, 23 Michigan, 24 OSU, and 22 Georgia in that order. Ohio State checks that box, where their defense is somewhere in that list of great defenses that have helped their team win it all over the past, 5 seasons now, including this one. It's an elite defense. Matt Patricia has done a phenomenal job. Cade McDonald, Caden Curry, Edric Houston, Tywone Malone, Kenyatta Jackson Jr. on that defensive line, Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles at linebacker, and then you have Caleb Downs, Davison Igbinosun, Lorenzo Styles Jr., Aaron Scott, Devin Sanchez, Jermaine Matthews Jr., Jalen McClain, Malik Hartford. Could go on and on and on. There's just, that defense is so deep. It's so great. I've actually been more impressed with their run defense than pass defense. And maybe that'll shock people, but the way that they've been able to defend the run with all they replaced up front, they replaced more up front than in the backfield, has just been incredibly impressive. They have alien players. That's another reason why I think they're number one as of this moment. So Indiana is a very complete team. I think from a merit-based angle, they're one. But power ratings and who's going to win it all isn't solely like merit-based. There are things that take seasons to control, to change, and not just one season that also impact this. And the alien players is an example of that, where Ohio State has alien players because they not just develop well, but they recruit well. They have the two best wide receivers in America, the number one safety in America, the best linebacker duo in America, and if not that, then they have an edge in America, an Arvell Reese, who they often play there, that could certainly contend for being one of the best, if not the best. Sayin, you could also say, is an alien. You know, he's already playing like an NFL quarterback right now. He's completing over 80% of his throws. His QBR is above a 91. I think it's a 91.1. That's first nationally. His passer rating is bordering on a 200. It's crazy what Julian Sayin is doing in year one as a starting quarterback as a redshirt freshman. I have been very impressed with him, his accuracy, his commitment to his receivers, making sure he hits them accurately in their torsos. He can throw on the move. He is able to step up in the pocket. He maneuvers the pocket with precision. Ohio State's pass blocking has taken a big step back from where it was preseason and actually where it was at the end of last year. But you wouldn't know that if you didn't watch closely, because Sayin is so good at maneuvering the pocket that he can run for his life and make accurate throws. That is the mark of a fantastic elite quarterback. Their staff is proven. Ryan Day has an argument to be the best coach in America. Matt Patricia is a Broyles Award caliber defensive coordinator through this point in the year. Brian Hartline, people have questions about him as an offensive play caller, but as a wide receivers coach, best in the business, greatest position coach of all time. I think Tyler Bowen, for what he has to work with, is doing a good job on the offensive line. Larry Johnson is having a great year as the defensive line coach. Laurinaitis is doing well. Tim Walton, Matt Guerrieri are doing a great job. This is one of the best staffs in America, and that combined with the roster they have means they're one of the best teams in America. And as of right now, I think they're the best. And last but not least, the metrics say it. So the only metric that so far disagrees with Ohio State being at one, outside of maybe a few people who've adjusted their power ratings, I know a few people who have Alabama at one in their personal power ratings, Indiana in FEI is still first. But in FPI, in K Ford, in S&P Plus, Ohio State is number one. So the metrics say it, that Ohio State's the best team in America. And as of this moment, as of this week, right now, it's been this way for a few weeks, I do believe the Buckeyes have the best team in college football. Let me know if you agree with me, if you think I'm being too conservative, and if you think they're much further ahead of everyone else, or you think they're number one by a short margin, or you don't think they're number one at all. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Oh, that itch was so bad. I don't know what happened there, but that was so bad. So bad. Now we'll talk about another Ohio State topic, but specifically Jeremiah Smith and why he should win the Heisman Trophy. This will be a pretty brief one. Yeah, this will be a pretty brief one. Maybe I'm not getting enough sleep, or maybe there's something wrong with me, but my eyes are itching, and my left one is like it's doing its own weird thing. Here's why Jeremiah Smith should win the Heisman Trophy, and honestly by a pretty wide margin right now. So the talk is between Fernando Mendoza, Julian Sayin, and then the next tier is Marcel Reed and Ty Simpson. But the Heisman Trophy should be awarded to the best player in college football. Not the one who is putting up the best stats, although that should be accounted for. Not the one who is the best player at a certain position, like only quarterback, but the best player overall. That's very hard to judge and honestly is very subjective. But I want to entertain you a bit. I think Jeremiah Smith is the best player in college football right now. And I don't know if it's close. I don't think it is, but then again, measuring who the best player is in America is subjective in large part. There are objective ways to, I think, create different tiers of players, but then trying to nitpick who's actually first and who's second, third, fourth, etc. It's a very tough job to do. There's a lot of wiggle room. But Jeremiah Smith right now, he is 6th in total touchdowns, receiving touchdowns with 10. He is tied for 2nd in his long reception of the year of 87. He's averaging 13.3 yards per reception, which is low, 204th, but that really doesn't matter if we're being honest. He has 65 total receptions, is 6th. He has 862 receiving yards, that's 6th. He's a true sophomore, number 4, standing at a tall 6'3" and a big 223 pounds. He is a physical specimen. Like, talk about a freak athlete, an alien player, and his stats would be better than this if teams didn't have to game plan for him in a special way, where teams often bracket him, they double cover him, they basically dedicate a whole side of the field to him, and he always wins the one-on-ones. Same with basically his Ohio State brother, Carnell Tate, who sometimes doesn't look all that much different from Smith. Tate is at a really good year this season, but Smith, teams always game plan for him, and when they don't, he blows them up. I think that if you are a truther, if you are truly voting for the best player to win the Heisman, that you have to cast your ballot to Jeremiah Smith. I know that Sayin's been amazing. I get that. But what Smith does is completely unique. I know Sayin's accuracy is a tier ahead of everyone else's, but the next closest quarterbacks that you have to Sayin are probably Ty Simpson and Fernando Mendoza and maybe some others. None of them have the receiving supporting cast that he does. None of them have those receivers, and they all have pretty much played tougher schedules. With Smith, we've seen him play last year. We are seeing him play this year. We have a multi-year, more than 20 game sample size of him being an absolute freak, of him being a impossible player to shut down. You can only slow him down, and you can only hope to do that. You can only hope and pray to do that. And he's balling out. So I think that he is clearly the best player in America. Not only is he the best, but he is the most talented. He would go round 1, pick 1 right now, depending on the team, and he'd be the number 1 overall player available in the current NFL draft. He's invaluable. Defenses have to adjust for him. He puts up elite numbers. He makes amazing plays like the one-handed grab against Penn State, where that should have been tipped and probably picked off, but instead, he just makes a circus catch like, casually grab it as if he were catching an apple and it's a football, and he takes it down and gets a touchdown. And I think it's often harder to judge the best players, especially on defense and offensive line, but on offense, and specifically offensive skill position players, including quarterback and tight end, so receiver, running back, quarterback, and tight end, I think he is clearly the best. And that's enough for me to say that he should win the Heisman Trophy this year. He probably won't. At this point, I'd say it's likely going to go to Sayin, if not Sayin Mendoza, but Jeremiah Smith deserves to win the Heisman Trophy. He's clearly the best player in college football, and let me know if you think it's close, but as of right now, I don't know who else would be close. I don't. Speaking of Ohio State, at least in regards to their rival, the Michigan Wolverines, can Michigan finish strong? Can the Michigan Wolverines beat Ohio State, beat Northwestern and Maryland before the Buckeyes, and reach the college football playoff with a 10-2 record? Can they finish the season strong? Well, they need to continue to improve in different areas, and they need to fix the offense a bit, because the offense has taken a backslide over the last few games, while conversely, the defense has improved, especially in the tackling and fundamental soundness department. Well, I want to go through... Whoops, did not mean to do that. Did not mean to do that, guys. My apologies. There. Can Michigan football finish the season strong, beat Northwestern, Maryland, Ohio State, and enter a college football playoff where I don't know if they can win it all, but they can certainly compete to win a playoff game, maybe even two if they get lucky, and build on to having a very strong team in 2026 and 2027. Well, if they want to get on the right path, Sharon Moore and Chip Lindsey and Wink Martindale have to continue to make adjustments and improvements. Grant Newsome has done a phenomenal job as the offensive line coach this year, and yet the offense has kind of taken a backslide in recent games. And inversely, the defense has improved in some areas, but you'd like to see more out of them still. For Michigan, it's critical that they stay consistent in that, where the defense is able to continue to improve, the O-line keeps playing well, and you just become more consistent in your weaknesses in the passing offense. Make sure that Underwood is not put in the same situations he was against Purdue, or doesn't play as poorly as he did in that game. And if you can improve at receiver at all, hopefully you did over the bye week, you can help him catch the football better, have more communication and consistency with quarterback Bryce Underwood. This is an offense that when things go well, they can go well. I know they're a year away, but this is Michigan's best offense since 2023. It's better than last year's by a country mile. But they need to get a little bit better there, especially if they want to beat Ohio State and if they want to win a playoff game after beating the Buckeyes. And before that, let's not be mistaken. The Northwestern and Maryland games are not gimmies. If they want to beat those teams convincingly and not get beaten up and exhausted and worn down and be healthy for the Ohio State game, they need to improve leading up to that game, not just for that game. You need to trust Underwood more too. It feels like the offense is holding back, not in terms of, they're holding things for the Ohio State game, but holding back in the sense they don't trust Underwood to do things, or that they don't trust everything to come together, which I understand. Underwood's a true freshman. The roster's very incomplete. But giving him more command now, while he is young and while he is a freshman, will benefit him in the long term. Let him make the mistakes now. Let him get all that stuff out of his system. And hopefully as time goes on, he makes progress. We've seen signs of progress from him since his first game to his most recent game. But we've also seen a lot of ups and downs. And I just think that's a part of being a true freshman and a part of playing in this offense that is very incomplete, especially in the quarterback's realm of being a passer. So you got to trust him. Got to let him take more command of the offense, have a bigger stake in things. And I know that this might seem counterintuitive or even contradictory, but relying on your offensive line doesn't hurt. Sometimes against Purdue, they were forcing Underwood to make plays when maybe if you just relied on your O-line a little bit more and had more of a balance with your drives and rushing and passing, you could have had more success. Could have kept the ball out of Purdue's hands more. Could have scored more points. Could have pulled away in that game. And you didn't. So with Michigan, it's interesting. On one hand, you want to see them take steps forward in the passing game before saying that they can, be a good team to close out the year and be a great team next year. However, at the same time, knowing their personnel, their offensive line is really improving and has become a strength of the team as the season's gone on. Justice Haynes got hurt, and hopefully he can return. We hate player injuries here on College Football with Sam. And yet the rushing offense in a power circumstance is way better than it was earlier in the year. Why? Because the O-line's better. It's stronger. It's bigger. In part, some positions opened up due to injury to older players, and therefore you got younger, more talented, better body type players to come in, and they're having tremendous amounts of success. They have underrated depth. Relying on your offensive line in these next few games may not be a bad option, because you can both trust Underwood more and be more consistent in the passing offense while relying on your O-line and run blocking and rushing offense too. You can do all of those things. Something to do on defense. I think the defensive front is fine. As long as it gets healthy, it's doing its job. But the secondary, with how young it is, if you, especially for the Ohio State game or for the playoff game, because Maryland and Northwestern did not have amazing passing attacks, rotate them. Get them as much experience as possible, because they're very young. They have not always been healthy, especially with, Rod Moore re-injuring himself, and he hasn't really been back since that Wisconsin game. You need to be able to competently defend the pass, and that has been something that Michigan has really struggled at this year. I know analytically, not necessarily, but you also have to take into account that the only great passing offenses they've played this year are USC and maybe Nebraska. Just maybe. Ohio State's going to be better than both of those, at least than Nebraska. It's better than USC's, but maybe from a pass protection standpoint, USC's is probably better, but we'll have to see about that. I think that getting some of these younger guys more playing time in the backfield, making sure you can keep your defense, especially backfield and secondary, healthy is paramount, and getting more experience there will always help. Last but not least, special teams has been a disaster. It just has been. There's no way to sugarcoat that. Special teams has been a disaster. So you need to fix that. Zavada needs to get his confidence back. I don't know how he does that. Maybe you give him some opportunities from long range against Northwestern and Maryland, trusting him with that. But he needs his confidence back. He's still a good kicker, just not as good as he was last year. Punting and punt returning have been abysmal. That needs to be fixed, because field position can help you win that Ohio State game. It can help you compete in that playoff game or win it if you get there. And more importantly, it's not like Northwestern or Maryland have great special teams. If you want to beat them and not have to exhaust yourself in doing so, winning that field position battle or kicking field goals and making them while they miss it can help you get there. Michigan can finish the season strong. The likelihood of them finishing 10-2 is much higher than most think. However, it's not a guarantee. They have work to do. They have a game this Saturday that will tell us a lot. And they have to get to that drawing board. They have to play hard. They have to play tough. They have to play smart. And they have to get healthy. Those are my thoughts on Michigan football and the final few weeks of their 2025 season. Ooh, now this is a pretty cool topic to talk about. Texas Tech. Why can Texas Tech win it all? I was having a conversation with Bald Father Betts, and we were discussing Texas Tech, and him and I were talking about him, and he actually mentioned that, maybe Texas Tech can win it all if certain things go right. And with him giving the blessing, he's one of the people I watch, I follow, where if they say something, I take it with a lot of weight. So I'm going to roll with it. I think Texas Tech can win the national championship. The Texas Tech Red Raiders can win the national championship this year. They can string together a good enough effort in 3 or 4 games in a row to hoist the trophy. Am I picking that to happen? Will I pick that to happen? On the first answer, probably not. Second question, probably not. But Texas Tech can win it all, guys, and I'm going to tell you why they can. They have a massive non-negotiable called David Bailey, Romello Height, called Lee Hunter, Skylar Jill Howard before he was injured, and Jacob Rodriguez. Their defensive front, but especially that defensive line, is a non-negotiable. It just is. When you combine for 17.5 sacks between your defensive ends, when you are number one by a mile in ESPN's defensive efficiency from ESPN's FPI, and the other team that is competing with you in that category, Ohio State, for example, they have played a similar level of strength of schedule to you. So you actually have an argument to have the number one defense. And you have two elite pass rushers in David Bailey and Romello Height. And you have a senior, two seniors in Terrell Tillman and Charles Esters, the third behind them. You have A.J. Holmes, Amir Washington, Jaden Cofield. It is a deep defensive line. They have only suffered one critical injury to Skylar Jill Howard. Sadly, he's out for the year. That's a non-negotiable. That is a prerequisite to winning it all, is having a at least great or elite college defensive line. This is an NFL defensive line, not in the sense that it's better than any of the NFL D lines, but they have legitimate NFL players on them. Indiana, for example, has a great, maybe elite collegiate offensive line. It does not have the NFL talent or upside that Texas Tech does. And hearkening back to my strength of schedule comments, let's look. So Ohio State is 41st in strength of schedule. Texas Tech is 47th. And when you look at ESPN's defensive efficiency here, Texas Tech is first with a 95.1 defensive efficiency. Ohio State is second with a 92.3. Texas Tech is further ahead of Ohio State, about as far ahead of Ohio State that Ohio State is ahead of Oregon in defensive efficiency. That is crazy. And on the season, look, they have 29 total sacks. This is in 10 games. They have 11 interceptions. And more impressively, they have 17 forced fumbles. And Jacob Rodriguez has 7 of them with a fumble recovery and a touchdown. He also has 3 interceptions. And he has the it factor where he just makes plays when they need to be made. And models can't account for that. It's the same thing with David Bailey. Bailey has over 10 sacks. He's averaging more than a sack per game, a little more than a sack per game. You can't account for that. You can't. How good he is, how good Jacob Rodriguez is. And on top of the defensive line, and more specifically their pass rush from their defensive ends, their defensive front is good. I mean, they're second in havoc rate forced with an 18.4% defensive havoc rate. That means almost 1 out of every 5 of their opponents' plays are fumbles, interceptions, sacks, tackles for loss, stuffed runs, or incomplete passes. That is crazy stuff. Actually, I don't know if it is incomplete passes, but it's negative plays for sure and turnovers. That's nuts. That's absolutely crazy. When you look at it from a yards allowed per carry standpoint, Texas Tech only allows 4 yards per carry. And they've played Utah. They've played BYU. They've played some of the better rushing offenses in the Big 12 and arguably in America. When you look at what they allow from a passing standpoint or from a total success rate standpoint, let's go there first. From a total success rate standpoint, Tech is 6th in total success rate. They are tied for first in adjusted EPA per play allowed. They are first in just unadjusted EPA per play allowed. In yards per play allowed, they are 4th, only allowing 4.61. Crazy stuff. Texas Tech's defense might be the best defense in the country, and that would be a prerequisite to winning it all, is having one of the top-end defenses. And Tech, along with Ohio State and Oregon and Indiana, and if Alabama continues to trend the way they are, those are some of the teams that are in that camp. Rushing offense, they're not fantastic there, but Cameron Dickey has been a great running back this year, and Jacoby Williams, they have almost 1,500 total rushing yards and 16 rushing touchdowns. They get a lot of explosive runs. The offensive line with Howard Sampson, Will Jaddos, Sheridan Wilson, Davion Carter, and Jacob Ponton is one of the better lines of scrimmage in the Big 12. When you average that with their defensive line, they probably have the best lines of scrimmage in the Big 12, along with Utah, who they beat up on the lines of scrimmage in Salt Lake City. So the Red Raiders here, they have this capacity to just game control their opponents because of that rushing offense and also because of the defense. And that, along with their overall team efficiency, where they're first in defensive efficiency, they're third in overall efficiency. You want to look at FEI, which measures teams in standard deviations above the mean, above the median. Indiana's first there, Ohio State's second, Oregon is third, Georgia is fourth, Utah is fifth, Notre Dame sixth, Alabama seventh, Texas Tech is eighth. And Tech killed that Utah team in Salt Lake City. So there's a lot of upside to move there. And in ESPN's FPI, Tech right now is 11th. And I can tell you the reason why they're that low, little thing called priors. That's why they're that low. Priors in the fact that while they're very talented from an NFL standpoint, from a high school recruiting standpoint, they're not all that talented. If not for priors affecting them even more negatively than Indiana, because Indiana was far better than Tech last year, let's remember that, they would be top 10 in FPI. And in S&P Plus from Bill Connolly, they are, I believe, they're either fourth or they're fifth. Let me check on that right now. Live research. Yes, they are fourth with a 25.2 overall rating, 11th offense, 5th defense, 41st special teams. They're an efficiency machine. They're well coached. They are disciplined, and they're deep, and they're strong. And finally, Morton, when healthy, is a great quarterback. Elite, probably not, but good enough to get the job done. Absolutely. Morton is injured. He can't really stay healthy this year. And now with Will Hammond out, you're going to have to rely on Mitch Griffiths if Baron Morton goes down. You will not want to rely. You won't want to rely on Mitch Griffiths, who has played for several years before at Wake Forest. Wasn't really all that good. But Morton has a 163.1 pass rating, 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, took a ton of sacks against BYU, but he's 45th in QBR, and he's completing 65.7% of his throws. I think he's better than what he showed against BYU, and he just needs to get a little bit healthier. And I think with time, and with some of the opponents they have on this schedule, they can probably load manage and help him get back to being healthy in time to play well in the Big 12 championship. That is why Texas Tech can win it all, guys. When you have the defensive line play that they have and the team efficiency where they've just shown time and time and time again with a strength of schedule that is at an Ohio State level, and they're not quite Ohio State, but they're close from an efficiency angle, why can't they win it all? Like, Ohio State is up there in title odds. And much like Texas Tech, they've really had, well, one big game. And Ohio State won theirs against Texas. Texas Tech won theirs against Utah. I don't really count BYU as a big of a game as that Utah game. Again, I have Ohio State ahead of obviously BYU, but Texas Tech. But that doesn't mean Tech can't find itself a situation where they play 3 or 4 good games in a row, suffocate their opponents on defense, especially if they get a good draw in the bracket, which will be advantageous for anyone. Maybe they hoist the trophy. It sounds crazy. I thought it was crazy, but after having conversations with people I trust, looking over this defensive front play, and those efficiency metrics have been high since week 1, we're entering week 12, and they're still about as high as they were at the start of the year. I think Tech can do it. And that is a credit to Joey McGuire. That is a credit to their staff, especially defensive coordinator Sheil Wood, who commands that defense. And that is also a credit to their general manager, James Blanchard, who declined going to Notre Dame to be their general manager and all their transfer portal additions have panned out, and they've panned out really well. So it's a nice operation they have, and it's a wonderful story, and I think they could actually get it done. Let's now finally talk about, is that it? Really? Or am I? Yeah. We'll get to USC Oregon in a bit here, guys. Don't worry. We'll get there. But before that, I got to talk about yeah. Okay, that's good. Before that, I got to talk about Nebraska. After Nebraska's 28-21 win over UCLA, I changed my mind on a few things. I was already excited about Matt Rule's future with Nebraska, but my excitement has peaked in a new way. In my history of I've never been more excited about Nebraska football than I am right now. After that 28-21 win over UCLA, and with Nebraska entering the bye with a win in their most recent game and not a loss, and with how good TJ Lateef looked, with more importantly, how good the offense looked and how they played it to Lateef's strengths, didn't ask him to win the game for him, but just make plays that ended up winning the game, and how he was able to throw accurately on the move, and the defense played well for the majority of the contest. I'm excited for Nebraska's future under Matt Rule. I think Matt Rule is building something special with the Cornhuskers, and I strongly believe that next year's team is going to take another leap. That's what I think. Number one, Nebraska just had an itch there, and then that whole I'm a perfectionist probably shouldn't be a perfectionist as much as I am, but that just that really bothered me. So we're gonna start over. I have never been more excited. Now how do you say that? I've never been more excited than I am now about the state of Nebraska football. Matt Rule is building something special, and their 28-21 win over UCLA proved it. Why am I excited about the Cornhuskers, and what did that win prove? Well, namely, I think that game showed that Nebraska evaluates their talent at a high level, evaluates their roster at a Big Ten championship caliber level. Think of Raiola and how well he's panned out, and how other 5 stars have totally busted, and think about how he's been developed. Think about Emmett Johnson, and how Emmett Johnson right now has basically 1,500 all-purpose yards and could win the Doak Walker Award, and how he was a 3-star out of Minnesota. Now, I know a lot of that was on Scott Frost for recruiting him, but credit to Nebraska for keeping him and finally figuring out that he was running back number 1 this year. TJ Lateef, 3-star, is playing better than a lot of quarterbacks ahead of him as a true freshman. Think about Andrew Marshall and Sear Wright at corner. Both transfers. They've panned out phenomenally. And then Vincent Shavers, who's a younger player, not a high-level player out of high school, but, has a good family, athletic background, and has just succeeded and balled out at linebacker for the Cornhuskers. Their evaluations at most spots have panned out. Offensive and defensive line has been a little bit shakier, but receiver this year panned out. Quarterback, 150% panned out. This quarterback room may have been one of the better evaluations in recent memory with how well TJ Lateef played. That's what that game showed me. On top of how this team at this point entering the bye is 7-3. They have a chance to go 9-3, 8-4, and they already have improved their regular season win total from where it was last year. That's another thing too. Yearly progress. They've improved linearly every year, not just from a record standpoint, because that I don't think is always important because schedules change, but from a power ratings angle, they've improved linearly. You overlap that with improving in terms of win totals, you're going in a very positive direction. And it's the evidence for that is so strong that it can't be refuted. Nebraska is going in the right direction. All evidence points to that. The 25 team is better than the 24 team, which is better than the 23 team, both in power ratings and in regular season wins. That's very important. They're improving linearly under Matt Rule, who has also, I would say, improved in terms of, I don't know about a game manager, but he has certainly made better staff hires the longer he's been with the Cornhuskers. Development at quarterback is another important thing. So 23 had Heinrich Harburg, Jeff Sims, and then Purdy. Chubba Purdy. That sucked. That was an awful QB room, one of the worst in America. 2024, you get Raiola. Dramatic improvement. Want to see more out of him, but he didn't solely lose you games like Harburg and Sims and maybe even Purdy did. And now you get to this year where Raiola's out for the rest of the year, but before he exited, Dylan Raiola was improving in a variety of ways. So 18 touchdowns to 6 interceptions with 2,000 passing yards. The year before that, he only had 13 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. 158.6 passer rating to a 129.9. Completed 72.4% of his passes to 67.1. And his QBR, 65.4. The year before, it was a 63.8. So he improved in literally every way. And he only really had maybe one and a half games of the pass blocking figuring itself out. Like, his O-line for much of this year was probably worse than it was last year. And now they've just started figuring things out. And then look at TJ Lateef. Was a 63.3 QBR right now, a 239.2 passer rating, 81 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. He's completing 85.3% of his throws, 466 yards and 34 attempts, 4 touchdowns, no picks. The quarterback development at Nebraska this year has been among one of the more impressive developmental jobs in the Big Ten and in America, if this holds especially. The program stability, with Rule signing that extension, with the 2027 recruiting class taking off, Rule will be entering year 4 in 2026. First time since his job at Temple, where he's been at one place for 4 years. The stability will improve recruiting. It'll strengthen the culture. It will bring more credibility back to Nebraska. And with a lot of these players returning next year, the team should also continue its trend of linearly improving in 2026. And last but not least, you got the roster upgrades. So this is recruiting. Recruiting is improved under Rule compared to where it was under Frost. The 2027 recruiting class will be Rule's best. It has the chance to be a top 15, top 10 recruiting class. A chance. Will, I would say, most definitely be a top 20 recruiting class. And you also have to consider the transfer portal, where receiver additions panned out this time around, corner additions panned out, linebacker additions panned out. Williams Winery looks like he could be a star, and Spindler has been one of their better offensive linemen. So, or linemen, not linemen's. What am I saying? Anyway, the point being, Rule and this program are heading in a positive direction. That's not something I think you can refute. And just what a job by the Nebraska Cornhuskers under Matt Rule. I'm proud of this program. I have sat by for several years under Scott Frost. Nebraska fans know me very well as someone who isn't directly a fan of their program, but probably indirectly is a fan of their program. I like seeing them succeed. I really do. And I'm happy to say that they're 7-3, and it would be pretty awesome to see them finish out this year strong. But even if they don't, even if they maybe drop that game to Penn State and Iowa, even if they finish 7-5, they got that win over UCLA in a very tough spot, coming off that emotional loss. They're recruiting well. They have a good budget. They're attached to Rule for the long run, and I think only good things are coming for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And last but not least, let me get to any potential super chats, if there are any. I don't think there are, but I just want to make sure. There are not. There are no super chats. Okay. Tyler McDowdle Drummer. Hey, are you Are you Chimichanga guy? Just because I know that he was into drumming and I made him a moderator. And he usually would say howdy Sam and everyone. Are you Chimichanga guy? Like you used to be Chimichanga guy, now you're not? I think so. If so, welcome, Tyler. Thank you for all the years that you've supported the channel. Yes, okay, good. Now I know who you are, and now I can always make sure to answer your comments and your chats. So thank you. Let's get to this USC-Oregon early preview, and then I'm going to get out of here. I got to go eat. And then I got to get these clips up. I want to get one out at like 8:30 or 8:45, and then probably every 30 or 45 minutes I'll release more clips, and that'll be the case entering tomorrow. I know that both the Trojans and the Ducks have games this weekend, but hear me out. Oregon is going to beat Minnesota by 50 points, or at least it'll feel like it, and USC's favored by 6.5 over Iowa for a reason. This is a huge game for both the Trojans and the Ducks. For the Trojans, if they lose to Oregon, I mean, if they lose to Iowa, it's the same thing. But they're favorites over Iowa. They're going to be underdogs here. If they lose this game, if they lose any game, they're out of the college football playoff conversation. If Oregon loses this game, they will not get a home game in the playoffs, and losing to USC at home makes the Washington game a must-win. And that's probably an uncomfortable spot given it's on the road, it's a rivalry game, and Fish and DeMond Williams are going to want to finish out the season strong after that Wisconsin game. The early line is Oregon minus 6.5. Early total is 55.5. Time and network is to be determined, but I imagine it's probably going to be the NBC night game. At least that's what it should be. Maybe it's the 3:30 game. I don't know, but it's definitely not going to be the noon game due to those two schools being on the West Coast. That wouldn't make any sense. It's going to be a really good one and competitive, and the line is shorter than I would have expected it to be preseason. My thoughts have changed pending on Oregon's health and their status. And USC, look, we said preseason that they were a dark horse college football playoff team. We've hit the nail on the head there. We just have to see if they actually make the playoffs, as I predicted them to do so preseason. For Oregon, it feels like at 10-2 they're a shoo-in and they're a lock, but a win here really helps their odds, because if they win here, there's a chance they could get to Indy. If, say, Ohio State doesn't beat Michigan, if Michigan wins out, there's a chance that Oregon could win that tiebreaker and get to Indy. And if they win in Indy, they're getting that first round bye. Or if they just win out but don't go to Indy, you're 11-1. You probably get the 5, 6, or 7 seed, and you get a home playoff game, and you get some momentum entering that quarterfinal matchup. Get kind of the opposite effect that you did last year, where you won the Big Ten. Your first game was in the quarterfinal. I personally don't think that bye hurt Oregon all that much. I don't. Them and Ohio State technically had the same time off before playing their first playoff game. Oregon looked like that against Ohio State. Ohio State looked a lead against Tennessee, but beyond that, I think this year's Oregon team has a chance to be better than last year's, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves. They need to get healthy. They need to win that game against Minnesota, rest some starters if they're unsure about them, and prepare for this game, because USC is going to be a chore. USC against Oregon needs to prepare for the lines of scrimmage game of their life, because when you look at their schedule, their toughest road trip at this point has been Notre Dame on the road. Notre Dame does not have the trench potential that Oregon does. It's close, but they do not have the size on the offensive or defensive line that Oregon does. They do not have the rushing offense that Oregon could. I know they have Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, who are the best running back duo in college football. But we all saw, whether it was in USC's game against Notre Dame or in Notre Dame's first two games, they have a propensity to give up some TFLs that Notre Dame rushing attack does in a way that Oregon's just does not. Oregon's is this downfield bowling ball that you really have to put all of your effort and strength in to just hold it steady. Notre Dame's is pretty hit or miss. Sometimes it can miss in a big way, but with the running backs they have and their offensive line being a great one and one of the best, if they fire enough times, eventually they'll hit. That's more of what their rushing attack is. It killed USC. It did. So if that rushing attack killed USC, what could this Oregon one do? They need to really emphasize run defense and tackling and being in good position and keeping their eye on the football and properly attacking gaps. And Iowa, being a disciplined team with wonderful lines of scrimmage, is a great opportunity to test that out. It's a home game, 3:30. Iowa's coming off a pretty emotional defeat by Oregon. So this is the perfect testing grounds to see what you can do there. Oregon is going to be their toughest game since either the Notre Dame game or their toughest game of the entire season. It's going to be a chore, and it's going to be a good, old-fashioned, Pac-12 battle, now Big Ten battle. It's a shame that in the Pac-12 and later parts of the Pac-10, we couldn't have Oregon and USC be as good as they are right now at the same time. I know that there are many USC teams better than this one, maybe even some Oregon teams better than this one, but they rarely played each other when they were both in the top 25, and the odds say that both will win their games this Saturday and then progress to being ranked even higher, and this could be a top 15 matchup when they play each other next Saturday. For Oregon, this will be their toughest game since Indiana. I don't know if it's tougher than the Penn State game they played because, that game was on the road, and I think Penn State at that point was at least top 15, top 10, which is what USC is right now, but they host them. However, USC presents the unique challenge that really only Indiana on the schedule could of the downfield pass and of the intermediate pass. Penn State had that one play, and they had some pop passes that did well, but that was basically it. USC's passing attack and rushing attack and offense in general are a lot more similar to Indiana's than anyone else Oregon has played on the schedule. And while their defense is more comparable to, say, Wisconsin's than it is to Iowa's or Indiana's, or more comparable to what Penn State's is now than what Penn State's was when Oregon played them on the road, it's still a formidable enough defense to where if Oregon is off kilter, if USC is a good game plan, and especially if Oregon isn't healthy at receiver, where USC can maybe focus especially on the run and force Oregon into some punts or some tough situations in terms of fourth and short. So Oregon needs to take this game very seriously, and they will. And I almost don't know why I said that, but there's still this image around USC of being the soft finesse team. And this year, I don't get how you could think that. Their issues have more so to do with depth and lacking a high caliber of athlete on defense than it has to do with them not being tough. I guess that's why I said that. But Oregon, I think, is an undervalued team. I made a video on this that I'll link down below in the reply to the pinned comment to get more views, because we can always use more views, and I think it's a wonderful video we did. And the more Oregon fans we can get to view that and follow this channel, same with USC fans, the merrier. But I believe Oregon's very undervalued, and they have a chance to show out here as early 6.5-point favorites. And who knows, this line could shift up or it could shift down depending on the results on Saturdays. Some keys to this game, some very early thoughts here. Rushing offense, comparing them. Oregon is second, averaging 7.01 yards per carry. USC is third, averaging 6.47. Both are elite in rushing offense. They're havoc-proof. These offensive lines do not allow sacks, TFLs. They do not allow big plays to go against the offense. Oregon is 8th there with a 9% havoc rate allowed. USC is 4th with an 8.6%. They prevent negatives. They don't always stay on schedule, and some of that's because Oregon's played 2 top 5 defenses. Some of that's because USC has had several tough tests on the road and has been banged up. but they rarely are behind schedule. Sometimes they're off schedule, but they're either off schedule or on schedule. Rarely are they dramatically behind schedule in a big way that really forces them to do uncomfortable things. Their fronts are strong. USC's is strong in pass rush. Oregon's is more so strong in run defense. I think Oregon's front is stronger in this game. In fact, I can confidently say I know it is. But USC's is big. It's physical. When it plays well, it is a good defensive front. So this is going to be a rushing attack and lines of scrimmage game. Oregon, though, being the favorite, and in my opinion, if you account for depth and if Oregon is healthy and you take into account coaching, I really do like Oregon in this spot. If everything goes right for both teams, I love Oregon here. The problem is USC, by either their wisdom and their coaching or just by luck, because sometimes that happens, I think is in a better position roster-wise relative to their ceiling than Oregon is. What do I mean by that? Well, Oregon, from what we know, based on that Iowa game, is down their top 3 receivers. We'll see if that remains the case. Kenyon Sadiq is not a given right now. Alex Harkey, one of their best tackles, is not a given. USC's been playing without some of their offensive linemen for quite some time. Doesn't seem to have affected them. Same thing with Oregon. But USC is healthy at receiver, and USC seems to be healthy again at defensive back. So the health portion is playing to USC. And if Oregon is as banged up in this game as they were against the Iowa game, they could very easily lose, potentially even by 2 scores. If they are completely healthy, though, my preseason opinion that Oregon would win this game by 3 scores is very much in play here. If they're completely healthy, including a healthy Evan Stewart. The likelihood of that happening, though, is very slim. So that's why the line's set at 6.5, is I think the 2 extreme outcomes are USC wins by anywhere from like 9 to 14 points. Oregon wins by 17 to 24. You know, the kind of the at least a close median of that would be Oregon being favored by about a touchdown. That's sort of where I would lean. I think Oregon should be favored. Something else to keep in mind before we close out the segment is Oregon's pass defense. Is it the best in college football? With Ife Obadegwu, Brandon Finney, Dylan Thieneman, with Jaden Cannady, with Theron Johnson, with Kingston Lopa. What, like, is that the best pass defense in college football? And then you also have to include, Bryce Betcher, Jerry Mixon, their pass rushers, Mateo Iungale and Tatum Tuioti. Bear Alexander's been a game wrecker on the defensive line. This defense is Lanning's best, outside of maybe the 2023 defense. And this defense, at least based on the efficiency metrics that we have right now and the fact that this offense is nowhere near the 2023 offense, I'd say this defense is probably Lanning's best. So that's something to keep in mind too, since USC can beat you through both the air and the pass, while Oregon can defend both the pass and they can defend the run. That's my early preview of this game. Let me know what your thoughts are. It should be, based on what I know of both these teams right now, competitive, but that can dramatically change depending on the results on Friday or Saturday, and also the health status of the Oregon Ducks or to the USC Trojans if they suffer any injuries or get anyone back. Hopefully both teams are at their best, as healthy as possible, and I think when both teams are healthy, they're both top 10, and Oregon is top 5. That's all. That's all we wrote for today. That's all we planned for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you around very soon. I got to hit the road, go eat, and get these videos up. Tomorrow is my off day, but there will be content that's already scheduled and released. If you are a member of the channel, you will see it tonight, where all the segments will be up. You can watch all of them if you want, comment on them. They'll be out for the regular viewers anytime from now to early tomorrow as I schedule them out. So, see you guys soon.